Before we get into tonight's story, a quick thank you to Jeff Anon for sending in this video idea. If you have a story, a theory, a mystery, or something that has been keeping you up at night, drop it in the comments below. We read every single one, and your idea could be the next thing we cover here on Sleep Theories. Now, let us talk about a sound that should not exist. There is a sound you cannot explain. You have not heard it on any radio, in any concert hall, through any speaker system engineered by human hands. It does not travel through the air the way ordinary sound does. It does not bounce off walls or fade when you step inside. It follows you. It finds you in the deepest part of your home, in the basement, under the blankets, behind closed doors and sealed windows. It finds you at 2 a.m. when the rest of the world has gone quiet, and it sits inside your chest like the hum of a machine that was never meant to be heard. This is the story of Taos, New Mexico, a small city of roughly 17,000 souls, nestled against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the desert air is cold and sharp and the stars at night burn with a clarity that makes you feel both small and infinite at once. It is a place of artists and veterans, of retirees who came for the quiet, of Native American communities who have called this landscape sacred for thousands of years. It is a place where the silence, at least until the early 1990s, was something you could count on. Then Harold Wexler heard something that changed everything. Harold was 61 years old in February of 1993. He had spent 32 years as a structural engineer, a man whose entire professional life had been devoted to understanding how things hold together, how materials behave under stress, how invisible forces move through solid matter. He was not, by any measure, an irrational man. He was precise. He was methodical. He had spent decades listening to the physical world with the practiced ear of someone who understood that structures speak, that bridges and buildings and deep foundations all produce sounds when forces move through them. So when Harold began hearing something in the middle of the night, he did not panic. He did not dismiss it as imagination. He did the thing that an engineer does. He investigated. He described the sound in his initial report to the Taos County Health Department as something resembling a diesel engine buried underground. Not a distant engine, not a truck passing on a highway miles away, but something beneath the earth itself. A low, rhythmic throb that pulsed in slow, steady intervals, strongest between 2 and 4 in the morning when traffic was non-existent and the natural world was at its most still. He said it felt as much as it sounded, a vibration he could feel in his sternum, in the bones of his jaw, in the fillings of his back teeth. He lost sleep over it. Then he lost more sleep. Then he began losing weeks. By April of 1993, Harold had contacted his doctor about chronic insomnia. By June, he had begun experiencing migraines of a severity he had never known before. He developed occasional nosebleeds, which he had never been prone to in his life. His wife noticed that he had become irritable and disoriented, that he sometimes seemed to lose track of conversations midway through them, as though something was pulling his attention inward toward a sound only he could perceive. And then, gradually, he realized he was not alone. The first person to come forward after Harold's story appeared in a small column. In the Albuquerque Journal in the summer of 1993 was a woman named Patricia Sanchez, a retired schoolteacher who lived 4 miles from Harold and who had been experiencing the same phenomenon since January of that year. She described it in almost identical terms, a diesel engine, underground, worst in the pre-dawn hours. She had assumed at first that she was hearing a neighbour's generator. When she discovered there was no generator, she assumed she was developing tinnitus. When her doctor confirmed her hearing was perfectly normal, she had no explanation left. She had simply been living with it, silently, convinced that no one would believe her. Then came Robert Caldera, a Vietnam veteran who had moved to Taos for the peace and quiet. Then came Marie Solis, a ceramics artist. Then came James and Donna Archuleta, who ranched on the mesa north of town. Then came an elderly Pueblo woman named Clara Mirabal, who said the sound had begun disturbing her community's ceremonial nights. the hours when the desert was supposed to be sacred and still. By the end of 1993, the Albuquerque Journal had received complaints from more than 60 residents across a 20-mile radius around Taos. The symptom profile was disturbingly consistent across all of them: insomnia, headaches, nosebleeds, cognitive fog, a creeping anxiety that was difficult to articulate but impossible to shake, and beneath all of it, that sound, that low, slow, grinding pulse from somewhere below the ground. The Taos hum, as it would come to be known in the local press, had been born. And so had the question that would haunt investigators, scientists, journalists, and federal officials for the next 3 decades. What exactly was making it? To understand what made the Taos hum so uniquely troubling, you need to understand where Taos sits on the map. Not just geographically, but strategically, historically, in terms of what the American government chose to build and test and hide in the New Mexico desert across the span of the 20th century. Draw a circle 150 miles in diameter around Taos, New Mexico. Inside that circle, you will find Los Alamos National Laboratory, one of the most classified and consequential scientific facilities in the history of human civilization, the place where the atomic bomb was born, where the physics of annihilation were worked out on chalkboards by brilliant and terrified men during the Second World War, and where weapons research has continued, quietly and largely out of public view, in the decades since. You will find Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, another crown jewel of the American nuclear weapons complex, responsible for the engineering and testing of nuclear warheads across generations of Cold War armament. You will find Kirtland Air Force Base, whose sprawling underground facilities include one of the largest nuclear weapons storage complexes in the United States, a network of bunkers and tunnels and hardened vaults that stretches beneath the desert for distances that are not publicly disclosed. You will find White Sands Missile Range, where the American military has tested everything from captured German V-2 rockets to modern precision weapons, where the first nuclear detonation in human history scorched the desert floor on July 16th, 1945, at a place called Trinity. You will find the highways and rail corridors that once carried nuclear materials, spent fuel rods, warhead components, and classified cargo across the southwest through the height of the Cold War, routes that were heavily secured, frequently travelled by convoy, and almost never discussed in public documents. You will find federal land exclusions, restricted airspace, boundary markers that tell you to turn back and provide no explanation for why. Taos sits at the centre of all of this. It always has. The residents who moved there for the beauty and the silence moved into a landscape that had been shaped, underground and out of sight, by decades of nuclear activity. They simply did not know it. When residents began pressing local officials for answers in late 1993 and into 1994, the response from state and federal authorities was measured, careful, and ultimately unsatisfying. Officials acknowledged that people were reporting a sound. They noted that similar low-frequency hum phenomena had been reported in other parts of the world, in Bristol, England, in Largs, Scotland, in Windsor, Ontario, and that in none of those cases had a definitive source been identified. They suggested that the Taos hum might be industrial in origin, perhaps related to natural gas drilling or pipeline activity in the region. They suggested it might be geological, the result of unusual seismic conditions in the area. They suggested, with the carefully neutral language of bureaucratic plausibility, that some portion of the reports might be psychosomatic, that sensitive individuals were, in essence, hearing themselves. The residents of Taos did not find any of this satisfying. Neither did their congressman. Bill Richardson was a Democrat representing New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District in 1997, and he was a man who understood political realities and constituent pressure in roughly equal measure. He had been hearing about the hum from his constituents for years by that point, and the complaints had not diminished. If anything, they had grown more urgent and more numerous. People were suffering. They were losing sleep, losing health, losing their sense of safety in their own homes. and the explanations they were receiving from officials ranged from insufficient to dismissive. Richardson did what congressmen do when they want answers and want them on record. He wrote letters. He made calls. He formally requested that several of the nation's most prestigious scientific institutions conduct a rigorous investigation into the source of the Taos hum and report their findings. The institutions that responded were formidable. Los Alamos National Laboratory sent acoustic specialists. Sandia National Laboratories contributed engineers with expertise in low-frequency vibration analysis. The University of New Mexico assembled a team from its acoustics research program. The investigation, at least on paper, was comprehensive. Equipment was deployed across the Taos area. Seismic sensors were planted in the earth. ELF detectors, devices capable of measuring extremely low-frequency electromagnetic and acoustic signals, were set up at multiple points across the region. Mobile sound triangulation rigs moved through the desert, trying to pinpoint a source, a direction, a point of origin for whatever was producing the phenomenon. The public conclusion, released in 1997, was 3 words that satisfied no one: no identifiable source. The scientists had not found the hum, or more precisely, they had not found a source they could publicly attribute it to. The official summary noted that approximately 2% of the population in the study area reported perceiving the phenomenon, that measurements taken during the investigation had failed to record any external acoustic source corresponding to witness descriptions, and that while several unusual readings had been obtained during the investigation period, none rose to the level of a conclusive finding. There was, however, a classified appendix to the investigation report. Its existence was acknowledged, but its contents were not disclosed. The appendix was sealed. What was in it? That question has never been answered to the satisfaction of anyone who has spent serious time studying the Taos hum. What is known, through partial disclosures, through leaked fragments, through the careful work of researchers who have filed Freedom of Information requests over the course of decades, is that at least one significant anomaly was recorded during the investigation and then removed from the public summary of findings. The anomaly was this: low-frequency pulses were detected below 40 Hz, at the extreme lower boundary of human hearing, emanating from a depth that acoustic modelling placed at between 1.5 and 3 miles beneath the surface of the Earth. The signals were not random. They were not the signature of geological settling or seismic background noise. They were rhythmic. They pulsed with a regularity that suggested to the engineers who recorded them a mechanical rather than a natural origin. The report containing this finding was flagged for interagency review. It was removed from the public summary. The classified appendix was sealed. The hum continued. To understand how something like this could exist beneath the desert of northern New Mexico, you need to go back further. You need to go back to a morning in July of 1945, to a remote stretch of desert in southern New Mexico called the Jornada del Muerto, the Journey of the Dead, where a tower stood in the pre-dawn darkness holding the most dangerous object in human history. At 5:29 in the morning on July 16th, 1945, the Trinity device detonated. The yield was approximately 21 kilotons. The flash was visible from Albuquerque, more than 200 miles away. The shockwave shattered windows in Silver City, 120 miles distant. A steel tower that had stood 60 feet tall was vaporized. The desert sand beneath the blast fused into a glassy green mineral that would later be called trinitite, and it exists in the desert to this day, a physical remnant of the moment humanity first split the atom with intent. But the explosion that everyone saw was not the only thing that happened at Trinity that morning. Something else happened, something that was not visible, that did not make newspaper headlines, that was not photographed or filmed or celebrated. The shockwave from the detonation drove deep into the earth, not just into the sand and rock at the surface, but into the layers below, through limestone formations and volcanic rock and fractured granite, down through the geological architecture of the region in ways that took years to fully understand and that, some researchers have come to believe, were never fully mapped. The Trinity detonation was the first, but it was far from the last. The decades that followed the end of the Second World War saw the American nuclear weapons program expand at a pace and scale that is difficult to comprehend from the vantage point of the present. The United States conducted more than 1,000 nuclear tests between 1945 and 1992. The Nevada test site northwest of Las Vegas hosted the majority of atmospheric and underground tests on American soil. But research, experimentation, and classified programs were distributed across the Southwest in ways that the public record still does not fully capture. Underground nuclear testing, which became the dominant method after the partial nuclear test ban, Treaty of 1963 prohibited atmospheric detonations, presented a problem that the weapons community had not fully anticipated. When you detonate a nuclear device underground, the energy does not disappear. It moves. It travels through rock and mineral and water table and geological fault in the form of seismic waves. Some of that energy dissipates within miles. Some of it travels much further. Some of it, in regions with particular geological characteristics, can resonate, can bounce between layers of different density, can create standing waves of vibration that persist long after the explosion that generated them. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, as underground testing became more frequent and more powerful, geologists and physicists working within the nuclear weapons complex began to notice something troubling. Certain areas of the Southwest appeared to be developing unusual subterranean acoustic signatures. Readings from monitoring equipment showed persistent low-frequency vibrations in regions that had received no recent test activity. The vibrations were weak. They were far below the threshold of human perception under normal circumstances. But they were there, and they were not going away, and their patterns suggested that something in the deep geology of the region had been permanently altered. A classified research initiative was launched in 1961 under a name that appeared in a single fragmentary, declassified document recovered by researchers in the early 2000s, the Subsurface Resonance Containment Initiative. Its internal code name, referenced in the same fragment, was Project Subterrane. The stated objectives of Project Subterrane, as they can be pieced together from partial disclosures and research conducted by independent analysts, were threefold. First, to study the long-term vibrational effects of underground nuclear testing on deep geological formations across the American Southwest. Second, to develop methods for preventing or mitigating tectonic destabilization that might result from the cumulative stress of repeated underground detonations. Third, and most significantly, to identify and suppress what the document called residual resonance signatures, the persistent low-frequency vibrations that had begun appearing in monitoring data across the region. The primary research hub for this initiative was Los Alamos. The facility had the computing power, the classified infrastructure, the deep earth monitoring networks, and the security architecture necessary to conduct this kind of work without public awareness. Teams of physicists, geologists, and acoustic engineers were assigned to the project. Funding was channeled through budget categories that gave no indication of the work's true nature. Project Subterrane continued, according to the partial record available, through at least the 1980s. What it found, and what it did with those findings, remains largely unknown. But what happened in and around Taos in the years that followed suggests that the project may have done considerably more than study the problem it was created to address. In the early 1970s, at the height of Cold War infrastructure expansion, several classified programs were developed within the nuclear weapons complex to address a problem that had become increasingly urgent: how to power remote and deeply classified facilities in ways that were not dependent on above-ground power grids that could be targeted, disrupted, or monitored by adversaries. The solution that several research teams converged on was elegant in concept and extraordinary in engineering ambition: a compact nuclear reactor designed not for power generation at scale but for deep earth installation could be drilled into the bedrock at depths of a mile or more, where it would be invisible from the surface, immune to conventional attack, and capable of generating continuous power for decades without refueling or significant maintenance. Its exhaust heat would dissipate into surrounding rock. Its operational signature would be minimal. At sufficient depth, it would be undetectable by any monitoring technology that a foreign adversary might reasonably deploy. This was not science fiction. The United States had been developing compact nuclear reactors for military applications since the 1950s. SNAP reactors, systems for nuclear auxiliary power, had been built and deployed in satellites, in remote Arctic bases, aboard naval vessels. The engineering challenge of adapting this technology for deep Earth installation was formidable, but not, for the resources of the 1970s American defense establishment, insurmountable. Dr. Elias Mercer spent 11 years as a contractor at Sandia National Laboratories. He worked in acoustic engineering and vibration analysis, specifically in the context of underground facility design. He left Sandia in 1989 under circumstances that he has described as a matter of conscience. He did not speak publicly about his work for more than a decade. When he did speak, it was not through official channels and not on the record in any way that could be easily corroborated. But the account he provided to two independent researchers in the early 2000s was detailed, technically coherent, and consistent with what the fragmentary physical and documentary evidence suggests. According to Mercer, deep Earth nuclear reactors were installed at multiple points beneath the desert of northern New Mexico, beginning in the early 1970s. Their primary purpose was to provide power to classified underground facilities, including research installations, weapons storage complexes, and subterranean communication infrastructure. Secondary purposes included powering the seismic monitoring arrays that the nuclear weapons complex needed to track underground test activity, both its own and that of the Soviet Union. The reactor shafts, Mercer said, were drilled to depths of between 2 and 4 miles. The drilling was conducted by specialised teams whose records were classified at the compartmented level, meaning that individuals who knew about one aspect of the program did not know about others. The reactors themselves were not large by conventional standards, but at the depths where they operated, the heat and mechanical energy they produced had no easy avenue of escape. The surrounding rock absorbed much of this energy, but some of it, the portion that could not be thermally dissipated, expressed itself as vibration. Low-frequency vibration, slow, rhythmic, persistent, travelling upward through miles of solid rock, attenuating as it rose, growing weaker, more diffuse, less coherent, but never entirely disappearing. Mercer estimated, based on his own calculations and on readings he had access to during his time at Sandia, that these vibrations, by the time they reached the surface, would be at or just below the threshold of human perception for most people, but not for everyone. Some individuals, he noted, appeared to be significantly more sensitive to extremely low-frequency sound than the general population. These individuals would perceive the vibration not as sound in the conventional sense, but as something more visceral, a feeling in the body, a pressure in the sinuses, a disturbance in the inner ear that the brain would interpret as a low, persistent hum. This, Mercer suggested, was the Taos hum. The second layer of the problem was older than the reactors and in some ways more intractable. The Cold War had generated enormous quantities of nuclear waste, spent fuel rods, contaminated reactor materials, plutonium cores past their operational life, chemical byproducts of weapons production that were radioactive and toxic and had half-lives measured in thousands of years. The federal government had been grappling with this problem since the 1950s, and its solutions, particularly in the early decades of the weapons program, had been improvised, inconsistent, and in many cases deeply inadequate. In the desert of the American Southwest, some of this waste had been routed through Los Alamos transit corridors and placed in deep geological repositories, sites chosen for their geological stability, their remoteness from population centres, and their depth below the water table. These sites were not like the surface storage facilities that the public was aware of, not like the rusting drums at Hanford or the contaminated soil at Rocky Flats. They were deeper, more permanent, more carefully concealed. and they had an unexpected consequence that nobody had fully modelled in advance. Radioactive decay, the process by which unstable atomic nuclei release energy as they transform into more stable configurations, is not silent. At the quantum level, it is accompanied by the emission of particles and radiation, but at the macro level, in large concentrations of decaying material surrounded by dense rock and metal infrastructure, the cumulative effect of this constant energetic activity is mechanical. It generates heat, and uneven heating of surrounding materials generates stress, and stress in solid matter generates vibration. When aging plutonium cores and contaminated reactor materials were placed in deep geological vaults, reinforced with metal infrastructure, the radioactive decay of these materials interacted with the surrounding geology in ways that produced exactly the kind of low-frequency harmonic resonance that acoustic engineers were trained to recognize. The frequency profile of this resonance, based on the known decay rates of the materials involved, fell squarely within the range that had been recorded during the 1997 Taos investigation, below 40 Hz at the extreme lower edge of human auditory range. The investigators who detected this signal and flagged it for interagency review understood what they were looking at. They understood why it had been removed from the public summary. Acknowledging a low-frequency resonance emanating from 2 miles below the Taos desert would require explaining what was down there, and what was down there was not something the Department of Energy or the Department of Defense was prepared to discuss. If you overlay 3 specific sets of data on a single map of northern New Mexico, something emerges that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The first data set is seismic. The precise locations and depth profiles of anomalous low-frequency signals detected by monitoring equipment in the region across the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. These signals cluster in a pattern that is not random. They form nodes, points of concentrated activity, connected by corridors of lower-level resonance. The second data set is geographic. The locations of federal land exclusions, restricted zones, and security-designated areas in northern New Mexico. These exclusions, some of which date back to the 1940s, others to the 1960s and 70s, define a network of protected corridors that cut across the desert in ways that make little sense in terms of surface-level features. There are no mountains or rivers that would explain their shapes. Their boundaries curve and angle in ways that suggest they were drawn around something underground rather than on the surface. The third data set is historical. The routes of weapons-related rail and highway convoys documented in partially declassified logistics records from the Cold War period. These records are incomplete, but the routes they show, the paths between Los Alamos and Kirtland and the installations in the northern desert, form a web of transit corridors whose underground equivalents would explain both the geographic exclusions and the seismic clustering. When you overlay these 3 data sets, a triangular grid emerges. Its vertices are Los Alamos National Laboratory, Kirtland Air Force Base, and a cluster of northern desert installations in the Taos region. The hum, according to every credible witness account and every acoustic measurement that has entered the partial record, aligns with this grid. It is strongest at the nodes. It diminishes along the corridors. It is essentially absent outside the triangle. A recovered memo, dated September 22, 1987, and obtained through a Freedom of Information request that took 6 years to process and produced a heavily redacted document, contains a passage that has been widely quoted among researchers who study the Taos hum. The relevant unredacted section reads, "Resonance spike exceeded structural tolerance. Civilian perception risk elevated." The memo then transitions into a section that is fully blacked out, followed by a reference to the deployment of what it calls frequency dampening arrays. The same week that this memo was dated, in late September of 1987, residents in the Taos area reported for the first time what they described as strange vibrations. Local livestock were observed behaving in disoriented ways, clustering in atypical patterns, avoiding certain areas of fields and pastures that they had previously used without issue. The Taos veterinary community noted an uptick in reports of unexplained animal distress during this period, and then, over the following weeks, the vibrations that residents had noticed diminished, not entirely, but enough that the first reports did not generate the kind of sustained concern that the 1993 outbreak would. People noticed something unusual, and then it got quieter, and life continued. The frequency dampening arrays referenced in the memo appear to have worked, at least temporarily. The public acoustic study of 1997 was not, by any rigorous scientific standard, a failure of investigation. The scientists who conducted it were skilled. Their equipment was appropriate. Their methods were sound. What they found, however, could not be publicly reported without triggering consequences that neither they nor the agencies that commissioned the study were prepared to manage. The classified notes from the investigation, fragments of which have become available through various disclosure channels over the years, contain two phrases that appear repeatedly in the marginal annotations of researchers who have reviewed the documents. The first is reactor harmonic bleed. The second is subsurface resonance amplification. These are technical terms. They describe specific physical phenomena. They are not the language of speculation or pseudoscience. They are the language of engineers who have measured something and are describing what they believe they measured. Reactor harmonic bleed refers to the phenomenon by which the mechanical and thermal output of a deep earth nuclear reactor generates vibrations that propagate upward through surrounding rock, eventually reaching the surface in attenuated form. Subsurface resonance amplification refers to the process by which certain geological formations, particularly those with layered structures of alternating density, can act as natural acoustic resonators, amplifying and sustaining vibrations that would otherwise dissipate. The classified notes suggest that both phenomena were observed during the investigation. They suggest that the investigators understood that what they were recording was not geological noise, or industrial ambient sound or psychosomatic projection. They suggest that the investigators concluded with high confidence that the Taos hum had an identifiable source, and that identifying it publicly would require disclosing the existence of active underground nuclear infrastructure that had never been officially acknowledged. The reasons for maintaining that secrecy went beyond embarrassment. Admitting to the existence of deep earth nuclear reactors beneath northern New Mexico would raise immediate questions about treaty compliance. The Limited Test Ban Treaty, the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, and various nuclear non-proliferation agreements all contained provisions that could be interpreted as restricting the kind of subterranean nuclear activity that the existence of deep reactors would imply. It would raise questions about waste storage practices that the government had publicly characterized in ways that would be revealed as false, and it would create immediate and severe liability exposure for the communities whose residents had been suffering symptoms attributable to long-term ELF exposure for years. The investigation's public conclusion, no identifiable source, was not a scientific finding. It was a policy decision dressed in scientific language. The hum continued. The residents continued to suffer. The classified appendix remained sealed. Something that has received less attention than the hum itself, but that may ultimately be more significant, is what happened to the people who reported hearing it. Beginning in the late 1990s, a pattern emerged that several researchers have documented independently. Residents who had filed formal complaints about the hum, who had participated in the 1997 investigation as witnesses, who had been identified as sensitive perceivers, began to receive unsolicited outreach from health researchers. The outreach was subtle. It was framed as routine community health monitoring, the kind of thing that public health agencies do in regions with any kind of environmental concern. Participants were asked to complete questionnaires. They were invited to periodic checkups. They were given assurances that the monitoring was precautionary, that there was no known health risk, that this was simply good practice in a region with a history of industrial activity. What was actually being tracked, according to researchers who have pieced together the program from Freedom of Information disclosures and medical records obtained with participant consent, was more specific than routine health monitoring. The questionnaires focused on neurological symptoms. The checkups included auditory processing assessments. Over time, as participants were followed longitudinally, the data being collected painted a detailed portrait of the effects of long-term ELF exposure on the human nervous system. Specific parameters were tracked. Changes in sleep architecture, as measured by subjective report and in some cases polysomnographic data, collected under the guise of routine sleep studies. Neurological stress markers, assessed through blood chemistry panels that were presented to participants as standard wellness checks. Auditory cortex function, evaluated through hearing assessments that were, on the surface, indistinguishable from routine audiological examinations, but that focused specifically on the frequency ranges most relevant to ELF perception. The goal of this monitoring program, as one researcher has characterized it based on documentary evidence, was not to protect the health of Taos residents. It was to measure human tolerance to long-term ELF nuclear resonance exposure. The residents of Taos were, in effect, a cohort, a sample population living in proximity to a source of low-frequency resonance generated by classified nuclear infrastructure, whose responses to that resonance over time could yield data on human physiological limits. The monitoring continued. The residents were not informed of its true purpose. On March 14th, 2006, something changed. Residents across the Taos area began reporting a significant change in the character of the hum. It was not simply louder, though it was louder. It had developed a new quality, a pulsing pattern that had not been present before, a rhythmic variation in intensity that gave the sound a nearly mechanical quality. Some residents described a metallic grinding tone that accompanied the lower frequency. Others reported that the hum seemed to come in waves, building in intensity for several minutes and then partially subsiding before building again. Seismic monitoring data from the region, when it eventually became partially available through research disclosures, showed something consistent with these reports. Synchronized underground vibration bursts on the date in question, emanating from the same depth range that had produced the anomalous readings during the 1997 investigation. What made March 14th, 2006 significant beyond the resident reports was a sealed Department of Energy review whose existence was noted in a Freedom of Information disclosure without its contents being made available. The review was dated the same day as the frequency surge. Its subject line, the only part disclosed, referenced operational continuity assessment for legacy infrastructure programs. Legacy infrastructure. Deep reactors do not improve with age. The materials used in their construction, the containment vessels, the cooling systems, the mechanical elements that manage heat distribution and waste processing, are subject to the same entropic processes that affect all engineered systems. They corrode, they fatigue, they develop the microscopic cracks and material failures that, in conventional reactors, are managed through regular inspection and maintenance programs. Deep Earth reactors, installed in the 1970s at depths of 2 to 4 miles, are not accessible for conventional maintenance. They were designed for longevity, but longevity is not the same as invulnerability. By 2006, some of these systems would have been operating for more than 30 years in conditions of extreme heat and pressure, without the kind of regular servicing that any mechanical system requires to remain fully functional. Mercer's account, which touched on this period specifically, was stark. He suggested that the 2006 frequency surge was not, as the official silence implied, a routine variation in background resonance. It was, he believed, a symptom of system deterioration. The cooling systems of one or more deep reactors were failing. The heat that these systems were designed to manage was finding alternative pathways through surrounding rock. The mechanical stress this created was generating vibrations more intense than the system's normal operational signature. The hum, in other words, was no longer just the byproduct of functioning reactors. It was beginning to sound like reactors that were in trouble. In 2009, a team of independent researchers using commercial satellite thermal imaging technology conducted an analysis of heat signatures in the northern New Mexico desert that produced results they found difficult to interpret. The analysis showed heat plumes rising from beneath the desert floor in a pattern consistent with the triangular grid that other researchers had overlaid on seismic and geographic data. The plumes were not at the surface. They were detectable only because thermal imaging at sufficient resolution can identify temperature differentials in shallow rock layers that reflect heat from deeper sources. The depth of the heat source, modelled from the thermal gradient data, was inconsistent with natural geothermal activity. The region's geothermal profile was well documented. The heat plumes that the imaging showed were too deep and too concentrated to be explained by natural geothermal processes. They were consistent, however, with the thermal output of compact nuclear reactors operating at depth. The researchers submitted their findings to a peer-reviewed geophysical journal. The submission was rejected, with reviewers noting that the thermal interpretation required assumptions that went beyond what the data could support, and that the proposed mechanism, deep earth nuclear reactors, was not a recognised category of geophysical phenomenon. The researchers were not wrong about the data. The data was what it was. What they could not prove, within the conventions of peer review, was what was generating it. The government's response to the thermal imaging findings when it came was a characterisation that has been applied to many inconvenient data points in the history of the Taos hum investigation: sensor error. The heat plumes, according to a brief public statement from a Department of Energy spokesperson, were artifacts of satellite sensor calibration issues and not representative of actual subsurface thermal conditions. In 2012, a document was obtained that represents, in the view of researchers who have examined it, the closest thing to a definitive official acknowledgement of what has been happening beneath Taos. The document is titled Subterrane Continuity Risk Assessment, and it is dated 2012. Its provenance is disputed. It appeared in the possession of researchers through a channel that could not be officially verified. The government has neither confirmed nor denied its authenticity, which is itself a form of statement. The document, 11 pages in its released form with significant redactions, contains a line item in what appears to be a risk assessment matrix. The line item reads, "Civilian auditory exposure remains acceptable. Relocation unnecessary unless resonance breach occurs. Civilian auditory exposure acceptable. Relocation unnecessary unless resonance breach occurs." The language is bureaucratic. It is the language of a risk management framework, a document designed to assess thresholds and make recommendations based on cost-benefit analysis. And what it communicates, in the flat, neutral vocabulary of institutional procedure, is this. The government knew that civilians were being exposed to resonance from classified underground infrastructure. The government had assessed this exposure. The government had determined that the exposure was acceptable. The government had determined that it was not necessary to move people away from it unless something substantially worse happened. The people of Taos were not consulted in this assessment. They were not informed of it. They continued to hear the hum and to suffer its effects, and the document in a classified file told them, without their knowledge, that their suffering was within acceptable parameters. The hum did not stay in Taos. By the mid-2000s, reports of similar low-frequency hum phenomena were emerging from other locations in the American Southwest. Southern Colorado, particularly in the San Luis Valley, where independent acoustic researchers had been noting unusual low-frequency signals for years. Northern Arizona, in communities near the Nevada border. The Nevada test corridors themselves, where former residents and workers had been reporting anomalous sounds for decades, but where the density of classified military activity made it difficult to isolate any single source. The geographic expansion of the hum followed a pattern that suggested either the growth of the underground network or its decay, or possibly both simultaneously. New installations coming online would add nodes to the resonance grid. Aging installations failing would produce new and irregular vibration signatures as their mechanical systems deteriorated. A network in both growth and decline would produce exactly what was being observed. a spreading, shifting, intensifying pattern of low-frequency disturbance across a widening geographic area. The question that researchers could not answer was whether this expansion represented the deliberate extension of classified nuclear infrastructure into new regions, or the uncontrolled spread of resonance from failing deep Earth systems whose containment was becoming less effective over time. The two possibilities had very different implications. One suggested a program that was functioning as intended and expanding. The other suggested a program that was losing control of its consequences. There is a ridge in the desert north of Taos that is not on any public map. It is accessible by a dirt road that branches from a state highway and ends at a fence line marked with Department of the Interior boundary signs. The land beyond the fence is federally managed, which means, in the practical experience of anyone who has tried to access it, that it is not accessible. The fence is sturdy. The signs are serious. There is, typically, no one there to enforce the boundary, because the boundary enforces itself through the simple physics of remoteness and the psychological weight of official warning. At night, from the ridge just outside the fence line, the desert below is completely dark. No town lights visible, no highway traffic. The sky is the kind of sky that cities have forgotten, thick with stars and the occasional silent transit of satellites, and the air is cold and carries the smell of sage and dust and the mineral sharpness of high desert in the hours before dawn. If you place a geophone into the soil at this ridge, an instrument designed to measure ground vibration at frequencies far below what the human ear can detect, something comes through. Not the random microseismic noise that underlies all geological readings, not the distant signature of highway traffic or agricultural machinery. Something else, a pattern, a pulse, slow and regular, with a periodicity that does not correspond to any natural geological cycle, that does not match the signature of any known industrial process in the region, that falls precisely in the frequency range that the classified notes from the 1997 investigation described as reactor harmonic bleed. It pulses. It does not vary the way natural vibration varies. It is too regular, too structured, and within the regularity there is something more troubling. A pattern within the pattern, a modulation of the base frequency that carries information the way a carrier wave carries a signal, the way a radio wave, modulated at specific intervals, conveys something across distance. The people who have placed geophones in that desert in the deepest hours of the night and listened to what comes back have not agreed on what they are hearing. Some believe they are detecting the mechanical output of failing deep Earth reactors, the increasingly irregular heartbeat of nuclear systems installed decades ago and left to deteriorate in the dark. Some believe they are detecting something more deliberate, a signal being generated and maintained rather than simply leaked, a transmission of some kind using the geology of northern New Mexico as a medium. The final document in the subterranean record, the fragment that Mercer provided to researchers before he stopped communicating entirely, contains a section that was not fully redacted by whatever process had created the version he obtained. The section is brief. It describes the original purpose of the Deep Earth reactor network in terms that diverge from everything that had been understood about it. The reactors, the document states, were never solely power generation systems. Their secondary function, developed in parallel with the primary installation program and classified at a compartmented level above the primary program, was signal generation. Specifically, the generation of extremely low-frequency electromagnetic signals, using the nuclear resonance of the reactor cores as the carrier mechanism. ELF communication is a real technology with a real history in the American military. The United States Navy developed and operated Project ELF, an extremely low-frequency communication system used to communicate with submarines, because ELF signals penetrate seawater to depths that higher frequency signals cannot reach. Project ELF used massive antenna arrays in Michigan and Wisconsin, covering thousands of acres of land, to generate signals powerful enough to reach submerged submarines anywhere in the world's oceans. The system described in the subterranean fragment was different in its mechanism, but similar in its purpose. Rather than surface antenna arrays, It used the nuclear resonance of deep Earth reactors to generate ELF signals. The advantage was twofold. The signal generation was invisible from the surface, leaving no antenna array to be observed, photographed or targeted. And the use of nuclear resonance rather than conventional electromagnetic generation allowed for signal strengths that conventional ELF systems could not achieve. What these signals were communicating, to what or to whom, and whether the system is still operational today, the document does not say. The relevant sections are redacted. The original purpose, the document notes without elaborating, was considered so sensitive that its disclosure would remain restricted indefinitely. Indefinitely. The hum in Taos has never stopped. It has varied in intensity. It has been louder in some years than in others. The 2006 surge was notable. There have been other smaller surges documented in resident reports and in the partial seismic record that correspond to dates that appear in Department of Energy and Department of Defense scheduling documents obtained through decades of Freedom of Information requests. The correspondence is not perfect, but it is consistent enough to suggest that the hum is not a passive geological phenomenon. It responds to something. It changes when something changes. The residents who first reported it are older now. Harold Wexler died in 2011, still convinced, still articulate about what he had heard and what it had cost him. Patricia Sanchez moved away from Taos in 2003, and she has said in interviews that the hum diminished when she left, that it did not follow her to her new home in Arizona, and that this remains one of the pieces of evidence she finds most compelling. Not that she was imagining it, but that it was real and specific to that place. Robert Caldera, the Vietnam veteran who came to Taos for the quiet, developed a progressive hearing condition in his 60s that his audiologist could not explain, and that did not conform to the patterns of age-related hearing loss. He did not draw conclusions, he simply noted it. The younger residents of Taos, those who moved there in the 2000s and 2010s, have their own relationship with the hum. Some of them hear it, some of them do not. Those who do often go through the same arc that Harold Wexler went through in 1993. The initial disorientation, the search for a mundane explanation, the gradual realization that no mundane explanation is forthcoming, the symptoms, the reports that go unanswered, the slow accommodation to the reality of living with something you cannot explain. The federal agencies that conducted the 1997 investigation have not reopened it. The classified appendix has not been unsealed. The Department of Energy has not commented on the subterranean document. The deep desert north of Taos remains federally restricted. The fence on the ridge remains in place. The signs remain serious. And in the deepest hours of the night, when the temperature drops and the wind stills and the desert becomes as quiet as it ever gets, the geophone placed in the soil at the edge of the federal boundary picks up something rising from miles below the surface of the earth. Regular, rhythmic, structured, not random, not geological, not natural, something that was put there, something that is still running, something that, if the fragmentary record assembled across decades of investigation is to be believed, was designed not only to generate power, not only to manage the resonance of buried nuclear waste, not only to power the seismic monitoring networks of the Cold War weapons complex, but to transmit, to send a signal outward and downward through the Earth itself, using the resonance of nuclear decay as a medium that no surface monitoring system was ever designed to detect. What that signal says, where it goes, and whether anyone or anything receives it, are questions that the available record cannot answer. They are questions that the agencies who could answer them have chosen, for more than 60 years, to leave unanswered. The hum continues. The desert holds its secrets in the way that all deep places hold secrets, not by being empty, but by being so full of things that have no name in the language of people who have never learned to listen below the threshold of what ordinary hearing can reach. Harold Wexler heard something. He was right to take it seriously. The question that remains, the question that the sealed documents and the classified appendices and the subterranean continuity risk assessment of 2012 have not answered is not whether something is down there. Something is down there. The question is what it is waiting for. The coordinates that arrive by encrypted message give no address, no landmark, no context beyond latitude and longitude and the instruction to come after midnight. The ridge they describe is the one at the edge of the federal boundary, the one with the serious signs and the sturdy fence and the desert beyond that stretches dark and vast to the horizon. The geophone goes into the soil at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. The temperature is 11 degrees. The stars are everything. The desert is perfectly, absolutely silent. The kind of silence that seems to have weight, that presses against the ears like water. The display on the monitoring unit shows signal activity. Below 20 hertz. Below 15. Below 10. In the range where human hearing ends and the body's other senses begin, the range where the chest and the sinuses and the fine bones of the jaw can still perceive what the ear can no longer process. It is there. The pattern is there. The pulse is there, slow and regular and deeply, irreducibly structural. And within the pulse, the modulation. The signal within the signal. The pattern within the pattern. It is not the sound of something breaking down. It is not the dying vibration of failing Cold War machinery grinding through its final years in the dark. It is too coherent for that, too deliberate, too carefully patterned. It sounds like something talking. It sounds like something that has been talking for a very long time, to an audience that was never meant to be the people standing at the edge of the fence on a ridge in northern New Mexico at 2 in the morning with a geophone and a recording unit, and a set of coordinates from an encrypted message sent by someone who knew what was down there and could no longer bear the silence. The signal runs for 4 minutes and 23 seconds in its first complete cycle. Then it repeats, perfectly, identically. The same pattern, the same modulations, the same structured pulse rising through miles of rock and mineral and geological time to reach the surface of a desert that has been keeping the secret since before most of the people who live near it were born. You record it. You pack up your equipment. You drive back through the dark desert to the highway, and then to the lights of the town. You do not sleep. The frequency is still there when you close your eyes. It always will be. Once you have heard what is beneath the ground is never entirely solid again. Every desert is a lid. Every silence is a surface. And somewhere below Taos, below the art galleries and the adobe homes and the ceremonial grounds and the ranches and the retirement houses where people move to find quiet, something pulses, regular, rhythmic, patient, waiting perhaps for someone who finally knows how to ask what it is saying. Before we begin, please leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. If you're on Spotify, leaving a review truly helps more than you know. Also, drop a comment with what time it is and where in the world you're listening from. We love seeing where everyone's tuning in from and how far our community reaches. Now, let's get into something that'll make you question everything about America's most classified military installations. The Silver Files. What really happened at Area 52, September 12, 2011? Dugway Proving Ground, Utah. Chemical weapons specialist James Forsyth drives off base after his shift. The desert sun is setting behind the Cedar Mountains, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. He's been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight. His supervisor told him the overtime was mandatory. Classified project, need-to-know basis. The usual script. He calls his wife at 6:18 p.m. She answers on the second ring. He tells her he's finally leaving base, that he'll be home in an hour, that he picked up her favourite wine on his lunch break. She laughs, tells him to drive safe, tells him she loves him. "I love you too, Rachel," he says. "I'll see you soon." It's the last time anyone hears his voice. He never makes it home. His truck, a 2009 Ford F-150, is found abandoned near Skull Valley, 40 miles from the Air Force's most secretive facility, the part of Dugway unofficially referred to by military personnel in hushed conversations and redacted documents as Area 52. The driver's side door is open, key still in the ignition, engine cold, no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken glass, nothing that would suggest foul play or an accident. Just an empty truck on an empty road in the middle of nowhere. Rachel Forsyth reports him missing at 9:30 p.m. when he doesn't come home and doesn't answer his phone. The Army responds immediately, not because they care about one missing specialist, but because James Forsyth has Level 7 security clearance and access to some of the most classified programs in the United States military. The Army labels him missing. A brief search is conducted. Helicopters sweep the valley for 3 days. Ground teams cover a 20-mile radius. They find nothing, not a single footprint beyond those leading away from his truck for roughly 30 feet before they simply stop. As if he walked into empty air and vanished. Rachel stands at the edge of Skull Valley on the 4th day, watching soldiers pack up their equipment. A lieutenant tells her they've done everything they can, that the desert is vast and unforgiving, that sometimes people just disappear. She doesn't believe him. She can see it in his eyes. He knows something he's not telling her. The case is quietly closed within 2 weeks. Rachel receives James's final paycheck and a letter, thanking him for his service. No body, no explanation, no answers, just silence. She spends the next 12 years calling congressional representatives, filing FOIA requests, contacting journalists, demanding answers. Everyone tells her the same thing. There's nothing to investigate. Her husband wandered into the desert and died. The fact that no remains were found is unfortunate, but not unusual in such harsh terrain. But Rachel knows her husband. James was a careful man, methodical. He wouldn't just abandon his truck and walk into the desert for no reason. And she remembers the last few weeks before he vanished. How he'd come home pale and shaking. How he'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. How he'd stare out the window as if watching for something in the darkness. Something had terrified him. And then it took him. 12 years later, in autumn of 2023, an investigative journalist named Lena Hartman receives a plain manila envelope with no return address. It arrives at her office in Portland, Oregon, postmarked from Salt Lake City. She doesn't recognize the handwriting. The envelope is thick, heavy, official feeling. Lena specializes in stories that other journalists won't touch. Government black sites, classified weapons programs, disappeared whistleblowers. She's been threatened, sued, and followed. Her apartment was broken into twice. Her sources have vanished, but she keeps digging because someone has to. Inside the envelope, she finds 4 items that will change everything she thought she understood about government secrecy. First, there's James Forsyth's military identification card. His photo stares back at her. Young face serious. Crew cut. No smile. The card is real. She can tell from the holographic security features, the magnetic strip, the embossed seal. Someone with access to classified facilities sent her this. Someone taking an enormous risk. Second, a secure facility badge for Dugway Proving Ground. Level 7 access, biosafety clearance, chemical weapons authorization, and one more designation that makes her pause: Sector Silver approved. She's never heard of Sector Silver, and she's spent 5 years investigating classified programs across the American West. Third, a torn page from a government field notebook, the kind used by military scientists and engineers. The paper is yellowed, aged, covered in handwritten notes about electromagnetic readings, atmospheric disturbances, and something called a temporal phase resonance event. The handwriting is precise, clinical, the observations of someone trained to document the impossible with scientific detachment. And fourth, at the bottom of the envelope, a single date written in pencil on a small piece of paper: March 21, 1993. Lena stares at that date for a long time. Something about it feels important, though she doesn't know why yet. She spends the next 6 hours searching military databases, FOA request archives, declassified documents, and obscure Pentagon budget reports. Then she finds it. March 21, 1993. The same date the Pentagon approved a special access program connected to the Tonopah test range, the only document ever publicly linked to what military insiders call Area 52. The program's name is redacted, its budget is classified, its purpose is listed only as Advanced Aerospace Systems Research and Development. But it exists, it's real, and someone sent her James Forsyth's credentials with that exact date for a reason. Lena picks up her phone and calls Rachel Forsyth. It's time someone finally told her the truth about what happened to her husband. This is where the story begins. Act 1. The Real History of Area 52. Section 1. What Area 52 actually is. When most people hear about secret military bases in the Nevada and Utah desert, they think of Area 51, the famous installation north of Las Vegas where the Air Force tested the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and later the F-117 stealth fighter. Area 51 has become part of popular culture, the subject of movies and television shows and endless speculation about extraterrestrial technology. But Area 52 is different. It's not an official title. There's no sign at the gate announcing its name, no acknowledgement in public military records. Instead, Area 52 is a nickname, a designation used quietly among certain military personnel and defense contractors for several highly classified facilities scattered across the Great Basin Desert. The primary locations include Tonopah Test Range in Nevada, Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, and specific segments of the Utah Test and Training Range. These facilities are connected not by geography, but by purpose, by the nature of the projects conducted within their boundaries, by the classification level required to even know they exist as a unified program. All 3 locations have documented histories that the government cannot deny because the evidence is too widespread, too well known among local populations who've lived near these bases for decades. Tonopah Test Range, established in 1957, has long been acknowledged as the testing ground for stealth aircraft. The F-117 flew training missions from Tonopah for years before the Air Force even admitted the plane existed. Billions of dollars in black budget projects have flowed through Tonopah's hangars and runways. Local residents in nearby towns like Tonopah and Goldfield have watched strange aircraft for decades, triangular shapes moving silently across the night sky, craft that hover without visible propulsion, objects that accelerate at speeds that should tear any known aircraft apart. The Air Force always has the same response: testing of classified reconnaissance platforms. Nothing to see here. Move along. Dugway Proving Ground, established in 1942, is officially designated as a chemical and biological defense testing facility. It spans over 1.2 million acres of Utah desert, empty, isolated, perfect for testing weapons you don't want the public to know about. The Army has publicly acknowledged testing nerve agents like VX and sarin, biological simulants, and chemical weapons defense systems at Dugway for over 70 years. But locals in the small towns surrounding Dugway tell different stories. Stories passed down through generations of ranchers and miners, stories about lights under the ground, about sections of desert that animals refuse to enter, about military convoys moving through the night carrying equipment under heavy tarps, escorted by armed personnel who don't wear standard military insignia. The Utah Test and Training Range, covering nearly 3 million acres, is used for everything from artillery practice to electronic warfare testing to unmanned aerial vehicle operations. It's the kind of place where the military can blow up whatever it wants without civilian oversight, where tests that fail catastrophically can be buried literally and figuratively without anyone asking questions. These are the official stories, the acknowledged missions, the parts the military is willing to discuss in congressional hearings and budget justification reports. But there's always been something more. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests show that all three facilities have conducted research into areas that push the boundaries of conventional military science. Projects involving biological defense programs that go beyond simple protective equipment testing. Classified aircraft testing of designs that still haven't been publicly revealed decades later. Radioactive materials experiments that required evacuation protocols for nearby towns. Experimental propulsion research utilising technologies that sound more like science fiction than engineering. The connections between these facilities run deep. Personnel rotate between Tonopah, Dugway, and UTTR regularly. Equipment is transferred under armed guard in the middle of the night. Budget line items appear in Pentagon reports that reference all three locations under single program codes. And at the centre of all this classification, buried in a 1993 document that was accidentally declassified for 6 hours before being pulled from public databases, is a reference to something called the Silver Program. Section 2, the 1993 SAP approval. On March 21, 1993, the Pentagon approved an unnamed Special Access Program. Lena finds the reference in a congressional notification letter that was supposed to remain classified for 75 years. It was released by mistake during a massive FOIA document dump in 2017, quickly scrubbed from official databases, but not before several researchers downloaded copies. The letter is addressed to the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. It informs him as legally required that a new SAP has been approved and will begin operations within 60 days. The program's code name is redacted. Its budget is listed only as above threshold, which means more than $50 million. Its purpose is described in the vaguest possible terms: advanced aerospace systems research and development, signal obfuscation technology evaluation, deep underground testing facility construction and activation. But there's one line that wasn't fully redacted, probably because whoever censored the document didn't realise its significance. It reads, TTR DPG dual operations capability confirmed. Sector access protocols established per previous guidance. TTR, Tonopah Test Range, DPG, Dugway Proving Ground, dual operations capability, meaning whatever this program was doing, it required facilities at both locations working in coordination. Lena cross-references the date with other declassified documents from early 1993. She finds requisition orders for specialised construction equipment sent to Dugway. Unusual items. Massive, boring machines typically used for subway tunnel construction. The kind that can drill through solid rock and create tunnels 20 feet in diameter. Electromagnetic shielding materials. Sheets of metal embedded with specialised alloys designed to block radiation and the electromagnetic fields. Lead-lined containment vessels large enough to hold cars. Refrigeration systems capable of maintaining temperatures near absolute zero. None of these items match Dugway's official mission of chemical and biological defence testing. She finds flight logs showing C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft making multiple trips from Tonopah to Dugway in April of 1993. The cargo manifests are completely redacted, just black bars where description should be. The flights occurred at night, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. No explanation is given for why the Air Force needed to move large cargo between two bases just 300 miles apart, instead of simply trucking it on the ground. Unless what they were moving was so sensitive, so classified, that even a ground convoy with armed escort wasn't secure enough. And she finds one more thing. A budget amendment submitted to Congress in May of 1993. requesting emergency funding for unforeseen engineering challenges related to newly approved SAP operations. The requested amount, $200 million. For context, that's roughly $400 million in today's money, for a program that supposedly just started 2 months earlier. The amendment includes vague references to containment infrastructure failure and specialised personnel requirements beyond initial projections. Something at Tonopah or Dugway or both had gone seriously wrong. The Pentagon needed a massive amount of money immediately, and they needed it quietly, buried in an omnibus appropriations bill where few congressional representatives would notice. This becomes Lena's first real breadcrumb, the first piece of evidence that something extraordinary was happening at these facilities. Something that required unprecedented secrecy, massive resources, and infrastructure that went far beyond testing conventional military hardware. She calls Rachel Forsyth and tells her what she's found. Rachel is quiet for a long moment. "My husband told me something 3 days before he disappeared," Rachel says finally. "He said if anything ever happened to him, if he ever didn't come home, I should remember one thing. He said, they're keeping something at Dugway that shouldn't exist, and it's awake." Act 2. The first break section. 1. The scientist who tried to warn people. Tracking down people who worked at Dugway in the 1990s and early 2000s proves nearly impossible. Most former personnel refuse to talk, citing security clearances that remain active decades after leaving government service. Phone calls go unreturned, emails bounce back, sources simply disappear after initial contact. Lena contacts 14 former Dugway employees. 11 refuse to speak with her. 2 deny ever working there despite their names appearing in public employment records. 1 agrees to talk but backs out the day before their scheduled meeting, saying only, "They're watching, always watching." But Lena is persistent. She cross-references public records, retirement announcements, scientific publications. She looks for people who worked at Dugway but have since left government service entirely. People who might feel less constrained by old security oaths. After 3 months of searching, she finds him. Paul Howard, retired microbiologist, formerly employed at Dugway Proving Ground from 1998 through 2007. Published several papers on biological agent detection methods before his research went dark in the early 2000s. Currently living in a small town outside Boise, Idaho, teaching part-time at a community college. She calls him. He hangs up immediately. She calls again. He lets it go to voicemail. She sends an email, no response. She drives to Idaho, shows up at his house on a Saturday morning with coffee and a folder full of the documents she's collected. James Forsyth's badge, the 1993 SAP approval, the budget amendments, everything. Howard opens the door, sees the badge, and his face goes pale. Literally drains of colour. His hand starts shaking. "Where did you get that?" he asks, voice barely above a whisper. "Someone sent it to me," Lena replies. "Someone who wants the truth to come out." He stares at her for a long moment, looks up and down his quiet suburban street, checks the windows of neighbouring houses, then he steps aside and lets her in. They sit in his living room. He doesn't touch the coffee, just looks at the documents spread across his table, hands still shaking slightly, sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "I can't talk about classified programs," he says quietly. "I'm not asking you to," Lena replies. "I'm asking you about James Forsyth, a man who vanished 12 years ago, a man whose case is officially closed. There's no classification protecting a closed missing persons case." Howard is quiet for a long time. 60 seconds, 90. 2 full minutes of silence while he stares at Forsyth's badge. When he finally speaks, he chooses his words very carefully. "Dugway is bigger below ground than above. Most people don't know that. The chemical testing ranges, the biological simulation chambers, all the stuff you can see from the air, that's just the surface layer. The real facility, the part that matters, is underneath." He stands up, walks to a bookshelf, pulls out an old textbook on microbiology, opens it to a random page, runs his finger down the margin as if reading. But he's not reading. He's creating cover. If someone is listening, if his house is monitored, this gives him plausible deniability. just showing a journalist his old research. Some of those sectors are older than the base itself, he continues. They were built during World War II or just after. Expanded during the Cold War, kept growing, going deeper. Some of the lowest levels, you need special elevators to reach. Elevators that don't appear on any facility schematic I ever saw. He pauses, takes a breath. James Forsyth worked in one of those restricted sub-levels. I only met him a handful of times. Twice in the cafeteria. Once at a mandatory safety briefing. Once in a hallway 800 feet underground when I got lost looking for a laboratory I'd been assigned to. He wasn't supposed to be handling chemical agents. That wasn't his job. His background was in engineering, specifically in electromagnetic field systems and high-energy physics, but his badge, the one you have there, that gave him access to places most of us couldn't go. What places? Lena asks. Howard closes the textbook, sits back down, looks directly at her. There's a designation at Dugway, Sector Silver. I heard the name exactly twice in 9 years. Both times people stopped talking the moment they realised they'd said it out loud, like saying Voldemort in Harry Potter. Just don't speak the name. The first time I was in a meeting about underground ventilation system upgrades. Someone mentioned needing to extend air ducts to Sector Silver. The room went silent. The meeting ended immediately. No explanation. And the second time? Lena asks. I was reviewing access logs for a biological safety audit. Routine stuff. Making sure personnel with biohazard clearances were only entering areas they were authorised for. I saw an entry for Sector Silver. Listed 17 people with active access. James Forsyth was one of them. I asked my supervisor about it. He looked at me like I'd just admitted to murder. Told me to delete that entry from my audit notes. Told me to forget I'd ever seen it. Told me to never ever mention Sector Silver again unless I wanted to spend the rest of my career doing paperwork in a basement office. But you looked it up anyway, Lena says. Howard nods slowly. I tried. Looked through the facility directory. Couldn't find it. Searched the base computer system. Access denied. Asked colleagues carefully, indirectly. No one would talk about it. But I started noticing things. Personnel entering certain elevator shafts and not coming back for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Equipment being moved underground in the middle of the night. Sections of the base that appeared on some maps but not others. He leans forward. And I started noticing James Forsyth. He looked tired. No, not tired. Haunted. Like he was seeing things he couldn't unsee. I ran into him one night in the parking lot. 3 a.m. I was leaving after a late experiment. He was just arriving for his shift. We nodded to each other. Professional courtesy. But his hands were shaking. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd seen him 2 months earlier. Did he say anything? Lena asks. Just one thing. He said, don't ever volunteer for Sector Silver. Whatever they offer you, whatever they say, it'll do for your career. Don't go down there. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Lena feels her pulse quicken. What did he mean? I don't know. But 2 weeks before he disappeared, there was an alert. Base-wide lockdown. They told us it was a drill. Stay in your current location. Don't use elevators. Don't leave your building. Wait for the all clear. But I was in Building 12 when it happened, and I could hear something through the ventilation system. Howard's voice drops even quieter. A sound that shouldn't exist. Like metal vibrating at a frequency that made your teeth hurt. Made your eyes water. Made you feel like reality was bending around you. It lasted for about 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, lights flickered. Computers crashed. Clocks showed the wrong time. My watch said it was 9:15 p.m. The wall clock said it was midnight. The computer timestamp said it was 6 in the morning, all simultaneously. What caused it? Lena asks. The alert ended. Lockdown lifted. Everyone went back to work like nothing happened. No explanation. No follow-up briefing. No mention in any incident reports. But I saw James Forsyth the next day. He had a bandage on his hand. When I asked what happened, he just stared at me and said, "Resonance cascade. The field almost broke completely." Before Lena can ask another question, Howard's phone rings. He looks at the caller ID. His expression changes instantly. Fear. Pure, undisguised fear. The kind of fear that overrides rational thought. "You need to leave," he says, standing abruptly. "Who is it?" "Someone I haven't heard from in 15 years. Someone who only calls when people start asking the wrong questions. Someone who works for a department that doesn't officially exist." He ushers her to the door, hands shaking violently now, sweat pouring down his face. "Forget you talked to me," he says urgently. "Forget Sector Silver. Forget all of it. These people don't make threats. They don't need to. They just make problems disappear. And I don't mean they ruin your career or bankrupt you with lawsuits. I mean you disappear. Your apartment gets cleared out. Your family gets told you moved overseas. Your records get sealed. And nobody ever finds you." The door closes. Lena stands on his porch, documents clutched in her hands, watching through the window as Howard answers the phone with a shaking hand. 2 days later, she learns that Paul Howard suffered a massive stroke. He's in intensive care at a Boise hospital, sedated, on life support. The doctors call it a natural medical event. High blood pressure, poor diet, stress, bad luck. Lena knows better. She visits the hospital that night. Howard is unconscious, tubes and wires covering his body. She stands beside his bed for a moment, then notices something. His right hand, the one not hooked up to IVs, is clenched in a fist. She gently opens his fingers. Inside is a small piece of paper, crumpled, sweaty. She unfolds it carefully. 4 words written in shaky handwriting, below the Sheep Valley. Act 3. What sector Silver was hiding. Section 1. The declassified accident report. Lena can't approach Howard again. Can't risk drawing more attention to him. His stroke was a message. Stop asking questions. Stop digging. Stop now while you still can. But Lena doesn't stop. Can't stop. Because now she has a direction. Below the Sheep Valley. She pivots. Goes deeper into the historical record. Looks for incidents at Dugway that might explain why a facility would need protocols for temporal anomalies. Looks for anything involving Skull Valley. She finds it buried in a 1968 Army document that was declassified in the late 1990s as part of a settlement with environmental groups monitoring chemical weapons testing. March 13, 1968. Dugway Proving Ground conducts an aerosolized VX nerve agent test in Skull Valley, just west of the main facility. The test uses F-4 Phantom jets to spray the agent over a targeted range. Standard operating procedure for the time. Test the weapon, document the results, decontaminate, move on to the next test. But something goes catastrophically wrong. The next morning, March 14, a local rancher named Kenneth Pike drives out to check on his sheep herd grazing in Skull Valley. What he finds will haunt him for the rest of his life. Over 500 sheep dead, not sick, dead. Lying in the valley like they'd all simultaneously collapsed. Some are in groups, huddled together, others scattered across the hillsides, all of them dead. Pike calls the authorities immediately. The army responds within hours. They cordon off the area, begin their investigation, and the story starts to fall apart immediately. The nerve agent testing range is 7 miles away. Wind conditions on March 13 showed winds blowing northeast, away from Skull Valley. The sheep should never have been exposed to anything, but they're all dead. The army brings in specialists. They test tissue samples. They reconstruct wind patterns. They measure agent concentrations in the soil, the air, the water, and they discover something impossible. The official report released to the public states that VX nerve agent drifted farther than expected due to unforeseen atmospheric conditions. The sheep were exposed to lethal doses. The army accepts responsibility, pays out $1 million in settlements to local ranchers. New safety protocols are established. Case closed. But the truth is very different. Attached to the envelope Lena originally received, along with Forsyth's badge and the field notebook page, is another document. One that was never included in the public version of the accident report. One that should have remained classified until 2043. It's a supplementary analysis from the Army Chemical Corps, stamped with a classification marking and labelled, "For authorised personnel only." The document shows something the Army never wanted anyone to know. VX exposure levels in the dead sheep were measured. The results indicated concentrations far too low to cause death. Not even close to lethal doses. In fact, some sheep showed no VX in their systems at all. Completely clean. Yet they were still dead. The causes of death listed in this classified report make no medical sense. Cellular disruption at the molecular level consistent with exposure to extreme electromagnetic radiation. Tissue degradation showing signs of accelerated aging. Some samples show biological markers suggesting subject age 50 to 60 years in a matter of seconds. Internal organs displaying thermal damage consistent with microwave radiation exposure, though no microwave sources were present in the area. Brain tissue showing unusual patterns of neural damage. Synaptic pathways appear to have fired simultaneously, causing massive system overload. And at the bottom of the page, 2 additional data points that should never appear in a chemical weapons accident report. Anomalous radiation readings detected in Skull Valley, measuring 0.7 milliroentgens per hour. Source unknown. Readings concentrated in a roughly circular area, approximately 200 feet in diameter. Radiation decreased to background levels over the following 72 hours. Low-frequency atmospheric disturbance recorded by seismographic equipment at 0347 hours on March 14. Pattern inconsistent with aircraft operations, explosive detonations or seismic activity. Frequency measured at 0.5 Hz, which falls below the range of normal environmental sounds. Duration, 17 minutes. Lena reads the document 5 times. Each time she feels reality bending slightly around the words. This wasn't a chemical weapons accident. Something else killed those sheep. Something that produced radiation, electromagnetic disturbances, and biological effects that looked like extreme aging. Something that operated in ways that don't match any known weapon or natural phenomenon. She searches for other incidents in Skull Valley, finds scattered reports over the decades, ranchers complaining about unexplained cattle deaths in the same area. 63 cows dead in April of 1974, no explanation. 81 cows dead in September of 1981, blamed on lightning strike despite clear weather. 47 cows dead in June of 1992, just 1 year before the Special Access Program was approved. Hikers reporting strange lights in Skull Valley. Unusual humming sounds that made them feel nauseous. Areas where compasses spun wildly. GPS devices that showed impossible locations. Cell phones that received calls from numbers that didn't exist. All dismissed as coincidence or natural phenomena or hoaxes. But Lena knows better now. She's starting to see the pattern. Every incident clusters in the same area, the same 200-foot diameter circle, the same location where radiation was detected in 1968. She overlays a map of Skull Valley with geological survey data from Dugway Proving Ground. The incidents all occur directly above a section of the base, marked only as restricted underground facility, directly above Sector Silver. Section 2, the White Man Interview. Following another lead from her research, Lena tracks down a retired Air Force logistics officer named Lieutenant Colonel Derek Whiteman. He served at Tonopah Test Range from 1990 through 2005, overseeing cargo transport and equipment allocation for classified programs. Unlike Paul Howard, Whiteman is willing to talk, more than willing, eager even. He's been waiting years for someone to ask the right questions, someone who might actually publish the truth. They meet at a diner outside Reno. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The place is nearly empty. Just a waitress reading a magazine behind the counter, and one elderly man drinking coffee in a corner booth. Whiteman picks a table near the back, facing the door, where he can see anyone coming in. He brings a small box of personal memorabilia from his Air Force career. Photos of aircraft he can't identify. Commendation letters for missions he can't discuss. Unit patches for squadrons that don't officially exist. And one item that makes Lena's hands shake when she sees it. A transport manifest from April 1993. The same month as the SAP approval. The same month equipment was moved from Tonopah to Dugway. I was ordered to coordinate the transfer of equipment from Tonopah to Dugway, Whiteman explains, stirring his coffee absently. Standard procedure usually. We moved classified hardware between bases all the time. Prototype aircraft parts, radar systems, electronic warfare pods, experimental munitions, normal stuff for a test range. But this wasn't normal, Lena says, reading the manifest. No, this was different. Very different. First, the cargo was listed only by weight and dimensions. No description of what it actually was. Just a code number I'd never seen before. Second, it required a specialised transport container that we had to construct specifically for this mission. Took 3 weeks to build. Cost $11 million just for the container. He points to a line in the manifest. That weight listing, 67 tons. That's massive for a single object. Heavier than most fighter aircraft. And the dimensions suggest something roughly the size of a school bus. 28 feet long, 11 feet wide, 9 feet tall. But the handling instructions, they were bizarre. How so? Lena asks. No direct physical contact allowed. All loading and unloading had to be done remotely using robotic handling equipment. No human personnel within 50 feet of the object during transport. The containment vessel had to maintain internal temperature at 4 degrees above absolute zero. That's colder than the surface of Pluto. And there was this line at the bottom that I'll never forget. Minimise exposure to natural electromagnetic fields. Shield from solar radiation during transport. Monitor for temporal displacement effects. Lena looks up sharply. Temporal displacement? That's what it said. I asked my commanding officer what it meant. He told me some objects generate unusual electromagnetic fields that can interfere with electronic timing systems. Said it was a technical concern, nothing to worry about. But the way he said it, I could tell he was lying. You transported this from Tonopah to Dugway. We tried. The flight was scheduled for April 15th, 1993. C-5 Galaxy, same type of aircraft used to transport tanks and helicopters. We loaded the container into the cargo bay at 0200 hours. Everything was going smoothly until we started the pre-flight checklist. Whiteman pauses, takes a long drink of coffee, as if building courage to continue. During pre-flight, while the container was sitting in the cargo bay, something happened. The containment vessel started showing unusual readings. Temperature fluctuations. Internal temp rising from 4 degrees Kelvin to 50 degrees Kelvin in a matter of minutes, despite the refrigeration system running at full capacity. Electromagnetic disturbances. Every electronic device within 100 feet started malfunctioning. Radios emitting static. Computer screens showing random characters. Watches running backward. What did you do? The ground crew reported seeing shimmer effects around the cargo, like heat distortion, but the air was cold. Freezing cold. And some of them said they heard sounds, a low frequency. Hum that made them feel sick, made their vision blur. One crew member collapsed, started convulsing. We pulled everyone back. What happened to the crew member? Medics took him away. I never saw him again. Asked about him the next day. Was told he'd been transferred to another base, but I checked the transfer logs. No record of any transfer. He just vanished from the system. Whiteman's hands tighten around his coffee cup. I called my commanding officer immediately. He shut down the operation, cleared the hangar, evacuated everyone within 500 feet. The cargo sat there for 6 hours while they decided what to do with it. Finally, around 0800 hours, a team arrived from somewhere else. Not Tonopah personnel. They wore different uniforms. No name tags, no unit insignia. Just black fatigues and respirators. Where did they come from? I don't know, but they knew exactly what they were doing. They brought different equipment, more shielding, more refrigeration, more electromagnetic dampening systems. They moved the container to a different facility at Tonopah, somewhere underground that I didn't have access to. A place that didn't appear on any base map I'd ever seen. The transport mission was cancelled. I was told to destroy all records, which I obviously didn't do. He taps the manifest. But here's the thing. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to Dugway temporarily. Just for 3 days. Emergency logistics support. They needed experienced personnel for something urgent. When I arrived, I was taken to a sub-level facility, 800 feet underground, accessed through an elevator that required 3 separate security checks. What did you see? The same transport container. I recognized the identifying numbers on the side. It had been moved somehow. Quietly. Probably on the ground, at night, with minimal personnel and maximum security. And I saw something else. The container was being moved into an even deeper facility. Another elevator going down from the sub-level I was on, going so deep I couldn't even see the bottom of the shaft. Whiteman leans forward, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. While I was at Dugway those 3 days, I was involved in coordinating equipment for various testing programs, radar-evading drone swarms, plasma projection field devices for creating false aircraft signatures, high-energy microwave emitters for electronic warfare, all cutting-edge stuff but still within the realm of conventional military technology. But there was one program that didn't fit, Lena says. Silver Meridian, that was the code name, required components that made no sense for any military hardware I'd ever seen. Exotic materials, metamaterials that don't exist in nature, superconducting magnets powerful enough to create magnetic fields you'd only find near neutron stars, power systems capable of producing gigawatt-level energy pulses, enough electricity to power a small city for a month, all released in microseconds. What was it for? Lena asks. Whiteman looks at her with an expression somewhere between fear and fascination. I don't know exactly, but I saw things during night operations at UTTR. Things moved through the range that weren't drones, weren't aircraft. Some of them had no wings, no engines, no visible means of propulsion. They just moved through the air in ways that violate everything we know about physics. 90-degree turns at supersonic speeds, hovering perfectly still despite high winds, accelerating from 0 to several thousand miles per hour in seconds. And they didn't have pilots. Some of them weren't even solid. They flickered, like they were only partially present in our reality, like you were seeing them through a gap in space. I watched one object phase in and out of visibility 7 times in 2 minutes. Each time it reappeared, it was in a different location. Not moving through the space between, just appearing and disappearing. The diner suddenly feels too bright, too normal for this conversation. You're saying Dugway and Tonopah were testing craft that weren't built by the United States government, Lena says slowly. Whiteman meets her eyes. I'm saying they were testing something recovered from somewhere else. Something they've been trying to understand for decades. And whatever it is, it's in Sector Silver. And James Forsyth was one of the people trying to keep it contained. Do you know what happened to him? Whiteman is quiet for a moment. Then he reaches into his box and pulls out one more document. A classified incident report from September 12, 2011. The same day Forsyth disappeared. This was leaked to me by someone still on the inside, someone who thinks the truth needs to come out. It describes a containment breach at Dugway. Emergency protocols activated, temporal distortion detected, and one name listed under personnel affected. He slides the document across the table. Lena reads it and her heart stops. Personnel status: James Forsyth, engineering specialist. Status: displaced. Location: unknown. Probability of recovery: 0.001%. Displaced. Not dead, not missing. Displaced. Act 4. The device from 1993. Section 1. The sub-level diagram. 3 weeks after her conversation with Whiteman, Lena receives another anonymous package. Different handwriting this time. Different postmark. This one comes from Las Vegas. The envelope is larger, heavier, containing multiple items wrapped in brown paper. Inside is a single piece of paper, but it's extraordinary. A hand-drawn diagram, technical in nature, showing a cross-section of an underground facility. The detail is stunning. Every shaft, every chamber, every access tunnel, precisely labelled with military designation codes. Someone with direct knowledge of the facility created this. Someone with access to architectural plans that should never leave classified. Vaults. The diagram shows 8 levels descending into the earth beneath Dugway Proving Ground. Level 1, administrative offices and surface operations. Standard military base infrastructure. Level 2, chemical and biological testing laboratories. This is the part of Dugway the public knows about. Level 3, advanced materials research. Classified but conventional. Level 4, aerospace component testing. Still within normal military R&D parameters. Level 5, electromagnetic research facility. getting deeper into black budget territory. Level 6, exotic propulsion studies, definitely classified. Level 7, described only as high-energy physics research, restricted access. Level 8, the deepest level, 840 feet below the surface. A large chamber labelled in neat handwriting. S4 TDP Reactor Hall, Sector Silver Operations. The diagram shows the chamber as roughly circular, 200 feet in diameter. Multiple layers of shielding are indicated, 3 feet of lead lining, 6 feet of reinforced concrete, electromagnetic barrier systems. What appears to be a water cooling system with pipes thick enough to walk through, power conduits capable of carrying megawatts of electricity, all surrounding a central containment area. And at the centre of the chamber, a simple note: Primary Containment Vessel, March 93 installation. The diagram includes measurements, specifications, technical annotations. Someone documented this facility in precise detail, the kind of detail that takes months of observation to compile, the kind of detail that suggests intimate familiarity with every system, every protocol, every aspect of Sector Silver's operation. Attached to the diagram is a sticky note with a short message written in the same handwriting. Forsyth was maintenance engineer for the containment systems. He wasn't cleaning up after an accident. He was trying to prevent one. Sector Silver's primary containment showed critical fluctuation patterns for 3 weeks before September 12. They ordered him to stabilise it. He told them it couldn't be stabilised. They ordered him to try anyway. The containment failed while he was inside the chamber. This wasn't bad luck. This was negligence. They killed him through incompetence and covered it up. Check the procurement logs. They tried to upgrade the containment systems but used the wrong specifications. The math was wrong. It was always going to fail. Lena spends the next 2 months digging through every database she can access, legal and otherwise. She cross-references Pentagon procurement records with scientific equipment supplier manifests. She contacts researchers who've studied classified programs. She tracks down engineers who worked on similar systems. She connects dots that were never meant to be connected. Section 2. What the reactor hall contained. The procurement logs from 1993 tell a story that defies conventional explanation, but also reveals bureaucratic incompetence on a staggering scale. In March of that year, immediately following the SAP approval, Dugway Proving Ground requested and received equipment that belongs in the world's most advanced physics laboratories, not military testing facilities. Multiple tons of superconducting materials, niobium titanium alloys, yttrium, barium, copper oxide, materials that can conduct electricity with zero resistance at extremely low temperatures, helium refrigeration systems capable of achieving temperatures within fractions of a degree of absolute zero, the kind of systems used in particle accelerators and fusion reactors. Electromagnetic containment field generators, originally designed for experimental fusion reactors, devices that create magnetic fields powerful enough to hold superheated plasma suspended in space, preventing it from touching any physical surface. Radiation shielding that would be excessive for anything short of a nuclear reactor core. Lead, concrete, borated polyethylene, layer after layer of materials designed to stop gamma rays, neutrons and exotic particles. But the most telling items are the ones that reference specific scientific concepts that shouldn't appear together in any legitimate research program. Concepts that suggest someone was attempting to control something that operates outside normal physics. A device described in one manifest as a temporal phase resonance detection array, purchased from a defense contractor specializing in experimental physics research. Cost, $12 million. The specifications describe an array of sensors capable of detecting variations in the flow of time itself, measuring whether time is passing at the same rate in different locations within the same facility. A non-linear reflection test chamber, constructed by a company that normally builds particle accelerator components. The specifications called for a chamber capable of containing electromagnetic fields, operating at frequencies that don't exist in conventional physics. Frequencies below 0 Hz. Negative frequencies. mathematically possible but physically nonsensical in our understanding of reality. A biological shielding matrix designed to protect living tissue from exposure to what the manifest calls time differential radiation effects. The technical specifications describe shielding against a form of radiation that ages biological tissue at accelerated rates, not through chemical processes or normal radiation damage, but through actual temporal acceleration. Lena consults with physics professors at 3 different universities, carefully avoiding any mention of where these terms came from. She presents the concepts as theoretical questions. What would you need to detect time dilation? How would you contain negative frequency electromagnetic fields? Is it possible for radiation to cause aging through temporal effects? All of them give her similar responses with varying degrees of certainty, but the overall message is clear. These concepts suggest research into manipulating the fundamental properties of space-time itself. Temporal phase resonance is theoretical physics terminology for detecting time dilation effects, the kind of effects you'd observe near a black hole or at relativistic speeds. Not something you'd expect to find in a laboratory on Earth. Non-linear reflection relates to light behaviour in regions where space-time curvature becomes extreme, where the normal rules of optics break down, where light can be bent, twisted, or even reversed. Biological shielding for time differential radiation implies protecting people from the effects of time moving at different rates in different locations. It suggests the existence of localized areas where time flows faster or slower than the surrounding environment. This is not military hardware in any conventional sense. This is not weapons development or defensive systems or spy technology. This is equipment for containing and studying something that warps the fabric of reality around it. But here's where it gets worse. Here's where incompetence turns into tragedy. Lena finds a follow-up procurement order from 2011, just 2 months before James Forsyth disappeared. An order for replacement electromagnetic containment field generators. The new units were supposed to be upgrades, more powerful, more stable, better able to maintain the containment fields that kept whatever was in Sector Silver from affecting the outside world. But someone made a mistake. The specifications for the new generators were based on calculations that assumed a containment volume of 50 cubic meters, a reasonable size for most experimental physics equipment, but the actual containment volume in Sector Silver was 500 cubic meters, 10 times larger. The math was wrong from the start. The new generators were underpowered by an order of magnitude. They were never going to be able to maintain a stable containment field. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with a chain-link fence. Engineers at the equipment manufacturer noticed the discrepancy, flagged it in their initial review, sent queries back to Dugway asking for clarification. Those queries were ignored. Someone at Dugway, someone in charge of procurement, decided the engineers were being overly cautious, decided the specifications were fine, authorised the purchase and installation of equipment that was fundamentally inadequate for the task. The new generators were installed in August of 2011. 1 month later, James Forsyth detected critical fluctuation patterns in the containment field. He filed multiple reports warning that the system was unstable, recommended shutting down Sector Silver until proper equipment could be acquired, estimated the field would fail completely within 30 days. He was ordered to keep the facility operational, told to stabilise the field using manual, adjustments, and compensatory procedures, told that shutting down was not an option because of ongoing research schedules. 21 days later, the field failed while he was inside the chamber trying to implement emergency protocols. 21 days. Not even the full 30 days he'd predicted. James Forsyth didn't die in a freak accident. He wasn't the victim of unforeseeable circumstances. He was killed by bureaucratic incompetence and institutional arrogance, by people who valued keeping a research schedule over the safety of their personnel. The Pentagon knows this. The incident report Whiteman showed Lena makes it clear. They classified Forsyth as displaced rather than deceased, because they know exactly what happened to him. They know the containment failure created a temporal distortion. They know he was pulled into a region of space-time that doesn't connect properly to our own, and they did nothing to get him back. just sealed the facility, upgraded the containment systems properly this time, and pretended it never happened. Lena pieces together what she believes the full truth is. In 1993, something was recovered at or near Tonopah Test Range. Something that exhibited properties that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics. Something that generated temporal distortion fields, electromagnetic anomalies, and gravitational effects that defied explanation. The Pentagon approved a special access program to study it, built a containment facility at Dugway, deep underground, shielded from observation, and outfitted with the most advanced scientific equipment available at the time. They called it Sector Silver. For 18 years they studied the object, tried to understand it, tried to control it, tried to reverse engineer its technology, and occasionally containment failed. Breaches occurred, temporal distortions leaked out, manifesting in Skull Valley directly above the facility, killing livestock, affecting the environment, creating phenomena that couldn't be explained by conventional science. Each breach was contained, covered up, explained away. Until 2011, when bureaucratic incompetence created a catastrophic failure. When James Forsyth, a skilled engineer who recognised the danger, was ordered to fix the unfixable. When the containment field collapsed and he was pulled through into whatever exists on the other side of that temporal threshold. And now, 12 years later, the Pentagon is expanding the facility, installing more powerful equipment, attempting to gain better control over the object, which means they're planning to activate it again, which means another containment failure is not a question of if, but when. Act 5. The Truth About James Forsyth. Section 1. The Final Access Log. Getting access to Dugway's internal security logs is impossible through legitimate channels, so Lena doesn't try the legitimate route. She makes contact with a former NSA, analyst-turned-privacy activist who specialises in penetrating military databases for ethical purposes. She doesn't ask his name, doesn't ask his methods, just provides him with what she knows about Sector Silver and asks if he can find anything about James Forsyth's final hours at Dugway. 3 weeks later, she receives an encrypted email containing a single compressed file. When she extracts it, she's looking at a complete access log from September 12, 2011. Time-stamped entries showing everyone who entered or exited Sector Silver that day. The log shows exactly what happened during James Forsyth's final hours. Entry timestamp 21:30 hours, September 12, 2011. Location: Sector Silver, Sublevel 8, Containment Chamber S4. Personnel: James Forsyth, Engineering Specialist Grade 7. Authorization: Emergency Maintenance Protocol Authorization Code Delta 773. Purpose of access: containment field showing critical fluctuation patterns consistent with imminent failure. Emergency stabilization procedures required. The log has several more entries timestamped in sequence. 21:37 hours. Primary field generators operating at 91% efficiency. Insufficient for containment volume. Observing unusual electromagnetic signature from containment vessel. Pattern matches pre-breach events from previous incidents. 21:40 hours. Object in containment vibrating at low frequency. Resonance pattern indicates active phase transition. Recommend immediate evacuation and facility shutdown. Request denied by command authority. Ordered to continue stabilization attempts. 21:42 hours. Warning: do not approach perimeter field. Temporal gradient increasing. Measuring time dilation factor of 0.003 seconds per second at 10 meter distance from containment vessel. Effect intensifying. 21:44 hours. Chamber breach event initiated. Containment field integrity at 47% and falling. Anomaly expanding beyond primary containment zone. Temporal distortion visible to naked eye. Reality distortion field propagating at estimated 12 meters per second. 21:46 hours. Emergency evacuation ordered. All personnel cleared from Sector Silver except Forsyth. Cannot establish visual or radio communication with interior containment area. Electromagnetic interference blocking all signals. Last confirmed position: inside primary shielding. Attempting manual field generator override. After that, several lines are completely redacted, just black bars hiding whatever information someone decided was too sensitive to ever be revealed. Then 2 final entries. 22:03 hours. Containment restored at secondary threshold using emergency backup generators. Field stability at 68%. Sufficient to prevent further expansion. Searching for Forsyth. No physical trace detected. No heat. Signature. No electromagnetic signature. No biological residue. Subject appears to have been completely removed from baseline reality. 22:15 hours. Sector silver sealed. Level 8 quarantined pending damage assessment. Recommend reclassification of incident from equipment failure to temporal displacement event. Subject Forsyth presumed displaced into non-standard spacetime configuration. Recovery probability calculated at less than 0.001%. No physical trace. Not body not recovered. Not remains not found. Not presumed deceased. No physical trace detected. As if James Forsyth was simply erased from existence. Deleted from reality like a file deleted from a computer. But the log suggests something even more disturbing. It describes him as displaced into non-standard space-time configuration, which implies that wherever he went, whatever happened to him, he might still be alive, just existing in a place or time that we can't access. A place where physics works differently, where time flows at a different rate or in a different direction. Lena reads the log 20 times, studies every word, every timestamp, every technical detail, and she realizes something crucial. The log says containment was restored at 22:03 hours, but the log also says no physical trace of Forsyth was detected, which means whatever pulled him in, whatever opened during that containment breach, closed before anyone could search for him. He wasn't vaporized or killed. He was taken somewhere, pulled through a doorway that slammed shut before anyone could follow. A doorway that, according to the Skull Valley footage, reopened briefly 2 minutes earlier at a location 40 miles away. Section 2. The Skull Valley footage. The final piece of the puzzle comes from a UTTR maintenance worker who reaches out to Lena through an anonymous email service. He identifies himself only as a witness who can't live with the silence anymore. He won't give his name, won't meet in person. But he's willing to share something he's kept secret for 12 years because he believes people deserve to know the truth. A video file, 37 seconds long, recorded on a security camera overlooking Skull Valley on the night of September the 12th, 2011. The file has metadata intact, showing it was recorded by a wireless security system monitoring ground equipment in the valley. Lena downloads it to an isolated computer, not connected to the internet, following digital security protocols she's learned from years of handling classified leaks. Her hands shake so badly she can barely click the mouse. The footage is grainy, shot from a distance, probably several miles from the event. The camera has a telephoto lens, allowing it to capture events far away but with reduced image quality. It's night time. The valley is dark except for some lights from dugway proving ground visible in the distance and a few floodlights illuminating. Ground equipment. At first, nothing seems unusual. Just empty desert under a clear sky. Stars visible overhead. The kind of peaceful night scene you'd expect in the Utah wilderness. Then, at the 10-second mark, something appears. A distortion in the air above Skull Valley. Spherical. Maybe 50 feet in diameter, though it's hard to judge distance and scale in the darkness. It doesn't appear gradually, just suddenly exists where nothing was a moment before. The distortion shimmers like heat haze, but the shimmer moves wrong. Ripples propagate in ways that hurt to watch. Patterns that don't follow the laws of wave motion. Circles expanding, then contracting. Spirals forming and dissolving. Movement that suggests the fabric of space itself is bending. The edges of the sphere blur and sharpen randomly, as if it can't quite decide whether to exist. Sometimes the boundaries are clear, a definite line between normal space and whatever this thing is. Sometimes the edges fade into nothingness, the distortion bleeding out into the surrounding air like ink spreading in water. Ground equipment visible in the frame starts behaving impossibly. Vehicles flicker, not like lights going on and off. like the vehicles themselves phase in and out of existence. Visible, then transparent, then visible again. Structures waver. A metal storage container appears to age rapidly, rust spreading across its surface in seconds. Then the rust vanishes and the container looks new again. Lights strobe, on, off, different colours, white, red, purple, colours that don't come from normal light sources. Time itself seems to be breaking down within the sphere's area of influence. Personnel can be seen fleeing the area, small figures running away from the distortion, abandoning equipment, scattering in all directions. Some of them move normally, others move in strange ways. One figure appears to take 3 steps but covers 50 feet of distance. Another figure runs but seems to barely move, like they're running through invisible syrup. At 23 seconds, the critical moment arrives. The sphere pulses, expands slightly, growing from maybe 50 feet to 70 feet in diameter. The expansion takes less than a second, but the effect is dramatic. The air around the distortion ripples outward like a shockwave, and in the centre of the sphere, visible for just 3 frames of video, roughly 1/10 of a second, there's something. A shape, human-sized, standing upright, but wrong. The proportions shift between frames. In the first frame it looks like a normal human figure. In the second frame it's elongated, stretched, like someone pulling taffy. In the third frame it's compressed, shorter, wider, distorted. The silhouette ripples like water, edges dissolving and reforming, as if the person is trying to maintain a coherent form, but the surrounding distortion is pulling them apart at a molecular level. It raises what might be an arm, reaches toward the camera, toward the outside world, toward normal reality. The gesture is desperate, pleading, the movement of someone drowning, reaching for the surface, trying to find something solid to grab onto. Then the sphere collapses, not gradually, not slowly, just suddenly ceases to exist. There one moment, gone the next. No fade, no gradual dissipation. The distortion simply stops being present in our reality. The equipment stops flickering. The air returns to normal. The valley is dark and quiet once again, as if nothing ever happened. The timestamp on the video reads September 12, 2011. 22:01 hours, 2 minutes before the access log showed containment being restored at Dugway. 2 minutes before the facility was sealed and Forsyth was declared displaced. Lena watches the footage 37 times, studies it frame by frame, examines every pixel of the human-shaped figure visible for those 3 critical frames, and she knows. That's James Forsyth, trapped inside a temporal anomaly, displaced from normal space-time but not dead, existing in a region where the laws of physics don't work correctly, where his body can't maintain a stable configuration, where he's conscious and aware and desperately trying to get back to our reality. For 2 minutes, the distortion that took him was visible in Skull Valley, manifesting in physical space above the underground facility where he'd been taken. Close enough to our world that he could almost touch it, close enough that cameras could capture his image, but not close enough to escape, and then it closed. The doorway slammed shut. The temporal anomaly collapsed back into whatever dimension or timeline or impossible space it occupies, leaving James Forsyth trapped on the other side. Alive but unreachable, visible but intangible, existing somewhere we can't follow. Rachel Forsyth deserves to know this, deserves to know her husband didn't just vanish into nothing, that he's still fighting, still trying to come home, still reaching out across the impossible distance between realities. But Lena knows that telling her this truth might be crueler than letting her believe he's simply dead. What kind of hope is it to know someone you love is alive but trapped forever in a place you can never reach? Act 6. The Conspiracy. Twist Section 1. The Classified Meeting. Lena knows she's running out of time. The more she digs, the more attention she attracts. Strange cars have been parked outside her apartment for weeks now. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Always different vehicles, but always the same pattern. Park for a few hours, leave, return the next day. Her phone clicks when she makes calls. Sometimes she hears her own voice echoed back with a half-second delay. Classic signs of active monitoring. Emails to sources bounce back as undeliverable. People she's communicated with for years suddenly can't be reached. Messages disappear from her phone. Files vanish from her computer. Someone is watching. Someone powerful enough to access her communications. Someone who wants her to know they're watching. It's a message. Stop now. Stop before we have to make you stop. But Lena doesn't stop. Can't stop. Because she knows, if she stops digging now, James Forsyth's story dies with her investigation. Rachel Forsyth never learns the truth, and the Pentagon continues experimenting with something they don't understand, something that's already claimed at least one life, something that could claim many more. So she accelerates her investigation, reaches out to contacts in Washington, calls in favours from journalists with better access than she has, makes it known she's preparing to publish everything she's learned. She wants them to know, wants whoever is watching to understand that killing her or making her disappear won't stop the story, that she's distributed copies of everything to multiple sources, that if something happens to her, the truth comes out anyway. It's a bluff. She hasn't distributed anything yet, but they don't know that. That's when she receives a warning from an unexpected source, a former Pentagon analyst, someone she's corresponded with about other classified programs in the past, sends her a single document via encrypted email. The encryption is military grade, the kind of security you only use when lives are at stake. No message accompanies the document, just the file, but the implication is clear. This is important. This is dangerous. This is something you need to see. The document is a leaked memo from a closed Pentagon meeting. The classification markings are extraordinary. Special access program with a code word she doesn't recognize. Code words within code words. The kind of security that suggests only a handful of people in the entire government are authorized to know this information exists. The date on the memo is April 2, 2011, 3 weeks after James Forsyth vanished. The memo is addressed to senior officials in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Air Force, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and one organization Lena has never heard of, the Temporal Security Working Group. Subject line: Dugway Incident, Status Update and Public Affairs Strategy. The contents make everything horrifyingly clear. Containment stabilized at Delta 3 threshold as of April 1st, 0600 hours. Primary object returned to dormant state. Temporal gradient normalized to background levels. No further anomalous readings detected in sector Silver or surrounding areas. Personnel search discontinued as of March 31st. Subject James Forsyth shows no signs of physical presence in baseline reality. Extensive sensor sweeps of sector Silver and Skull Valley area conducted. No biological traces, no electromagnetic signatures, no residual thermal patterns detected. Analysis of temporal displacement event indicates subject was pulled into non-standard spacetime configuration during containment breach. Based on modelling of the object's known properties, probability of spontaneous return calculated at less than 0.001% over next 50 years. Recommend official classification as deceased to provide closure for family. However, residual temporal signature detected at 0.18 Hz suggests subject may be alive in displaced state. Signature is consistent with human biological rhythms observed through temporal phase barriers. If interpretation is correct, subject is conscious and aware, but unable to interact with baseline reality. No recovery protocols currently exist. Research into temporal displacement retrieval is ongoing, but unlikely to yield practical results within subject's expected biological lifespan. Public affairs strategy. Maintain narrative of missing person. Present case as tragic but mundane. Desert environment. Harsh conditions. Possible disorientation. Do not acknowledge existence of Sector Silver. Do not associate incident with March 93 Special Access Program. Do not discuss temporal displacement phenomena. Recommend closure of missing person case within standard time frame for such cases, approximately 2 weeks from initial disappearance. Excessive investigation period would draw unwanted attention. Local media interest has been minimal. congressional inquiries have been non-existent. No reason to prolong or complicate the situation. Containment upgrades scheduled for completion by June 2011. New field generators meeting correct specifications have been ordered. Installation will proceed once current research cycle concludes. And then, at the bottom of the memo, 2 lines that make Lena's skin crawl. Sector Silver operations will resume normal schedule by July 2011. Research priority remains understanding and eventual control of objects' temporal manipulation properties. Military applications remain theoretical but potentially revolutionary. Subject Forsyth's displacement, while regrettable, has provided valuable data regarding the object's effects on human biology. Recommend continued monitoring of Skull Valley area for any additional manifestations. Subject: not James, not Forsyth, not personnel, not victim. Subject. The memo refers to James Forsyth as if he's a research specimen, not a human being. As if his displacement into whatever exists inside that containment chamber is just another data point in their ongoing study of whatever they're keeping down there. Valuable data. A man is trapped in a dimensional prison, conscious and aware, experiencing God knows what kind of suffering, and the Pentagon's response is to note that his fate provides valuable data for their research. Lena feels sick, physically ill. She runs to her bathroom and vomits, stays there on the cold tile floor for 20 minutes shaking, trying to process what she's just read. They knew. From the beginning, they knew James Forsyth might be alive. They had sensor readings suggesting he was conscious on the other side of that temporal barrier, and they did nothing. No rescue attempt, no research into recovery methods, no effort to bring him back. Just a note that recovery is unlikely to yield practical results within subject's expected biological lifespan. They wrote him off, closed the case, lied to his wife, told Rachel her husband was simply missing, probably dead, lost in the desert. Let her spend 12 years wondering and grieving when they knew the whole time exactly what happened to him. And worse, they're going to keep experimenting, keep using the object, keep risking more containment failures that could trap more people the same way, because the military applications are potentially revolutionary. Section 2. What Sector Silver was actually. For the final truth assembles itself from fragments scattered across 12 years of investigation, dozens of documents, hundreds of hours of research. Sector Silver was never about chemical weapons, never about biological defense, never about conventional aerospace research. It was built to house something recovered during an experimental flight exercise over Tonopah Test Range in March of 1993. Something that wasn't built on Earth. Something that operates according to principles that don't match our physics. The object, whatever it is, produces effects that should be impossible according to our current understanding of reality. Non-linear gravitational fields that bend space around it, creating regions where distance doesn't work correctly, where an object 10 feet away might be simultaneously 100 feet away depending on your reference frame. Time dilation pockets where seconds pass at different rates than the surrounding environment, where an hour inside might be a minute outside, or a minute inside might be a day outside, where the normal flow of causality breaks down and effects can precede causes. Electromagnetic distortions powerful enough to affect living tissue at a cellular level. Radiation that doesn't just damage cells through normal means but actually ages them by accelerating their progression through time, making an organism experience months or years of aging in seconds. All of these effects match the 1968 Skull Valley incident, the sheep deaths, the anomalous radiation, the atmospheric disturbances, the impossible causes of death that showed signs of extreme aging, which means one of two things. Either the object in Sector Silver was already present at Dugway in 1968, kept secret for 25 years before the Special Access Program was officially approved in 1993, or the object recovered in 1993 is similar to another object that was at Dugway in 1968, which would imply there are multiple such objects, that whatever created these artifacts has been visiting Earth, or leaving artifacts on Earth, for a very long time. Either possibility is staggering. The Pentagon has been studying this technology for over 50 years, building containment facilities, developing shielding protocols, trying to understand how it works, trying to reverse engineer it, trying to create their own versions, because imagine the military applications. A weapon that ages enemy soldiers to death in seconds. No bullets, no explosions. Just point the device and watch your enemies wither into skeletons. A drive system that manipulates space-time to allow faster-than-light travel. Going to the stars, colonizing other worlds, leaving humanity's enemies far behind in the solar system. A time manipulation device that allows you to see the future, to know your enemy's plans before they make them, to win every battle before it's fought. These are the potentially revolutionary applications the memo referenced. This is why the Pentagon is willing to risk more containment failures, more temporal displacements, more people trapped like James Forsyth, because whoever controls time controls everything, and occasionally when containment fails, people get caught in the temporal distortions. People like James Forsyth. His job was never simple maintenance. He was part of the containment team, responsible for keeping the field stable, for monitoring the object's behaviour, for preventing breaches that could expose the entire program to the outside world. But on September 12, 2011, something went wrong. The object activated. Maybe someone tried to experiment with it. Maybe it activated spontaneously. Maybe the inadequate containment generators finally failed under the stress. Whatever the cause, the containment fields collapsed. A temporal anomaly opened, a tear in space-time spreading out from Sector Silver, manifesting briefly in Skull Valley 40 miles away before collapsing back into whatever dimensional space it occupies. And Forsyth, standing too close when it happened, trying desperately to restore containment, was pulled through that tear. Not killed, displaced. Thrown into a region of space-time that doesn't connect properly to our own, where he can see our world sometimes, feel it, reach toward it, but never quite touch it. Where he exists in a state that the Pentagon's own memo suggests is conscious and aware. Imagine that. Being pulled out of reality, existing in some impossible space between dimensions or times, able to perceive the world you came from but unable to interact with it, watching your life continue without you, watching your wife mourn, watching years pass while you remain trapped. How long has it been for James Forsyth? In our timeline, it's been 12 years, but in whatever temporal prison he occupies, has it been 12 years, 12 days, 12 seconds? Does time even pass consistently there? The Pentagon sealed the facility, upgraded the containment systems properly this time, with generators that actually match the required specifications, closed the case, classified the incident, and went back to studying their impossible object as if nothing had happened. Business as usual in Sector Silver. Ending. The final message from Forsyth. Lena publishes her investigation in November of 2023. She releases everything, all the documents, all the photos, all the testimony, the 1993 SAP approval, the 1968 sheep deaths and their impossible causes, Paul Howard's account of Sector Silver, Derek Whiteman's description of the object being transported, the sub-level diagram showing the facility 800 feet underground, the procurement logs proving inadequate containment equipment, the access logs showing Forsyth's final moments, the Skull Valley footage showing a human figure trapped inside a temporal distortion, and most damning, the leaked Pentagon memo discussing him as subject and describing his displacement as valuable data. A major online news outlet runs the story. The headline reads, "Secret military facility trapped scientist in time. Pentagon covered it up." It goes viral immediately. Millions of people read about Sector Silver, about the temporal anomalies, about James Forsyth's disappearance and the government's deliberate decision to abandon him to his fate. The Pentagon issues a statement within hours. The claims in this article are based on misinterpretations of publicly available documents and unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. Dugway Proving Ground is a chemical and biological defense facility operating under standard safety protocols. The disappearance of Mr. James Forsyth is a tragic missing person case with no connection to classified programs. No such facility as Sector Silver exists. The documents presented appear to be fabrications or creative misinterpretations of legitimate technical materials. The Department of Defense does not comment on rumours regarding special access programs. It's the response Lena expected. Denial, dismissal. The usual playbook. Claim the documents are fake. Call the sources unreliable. Suggest the journalist is conspiracy-minded. Move on and hope the news cycle buries the story within a week. Congressional representatives call for investigations. The Pentagon stonewalls. Requests for information are denied on national security grounds. The intelligence committees receive classified briefings. Whatever they're told is convincing enough that no further action is taken. The story fades from the headlines after 2 weeks. New crises emerge. The public attention moves elsewhere. Lena's article becomes one more conspiracy theory in the endless stream of internet speculation about secret government programs. But Rachel Forsyth reads every word, watches the Skull Valley footage 200 times, studies the photo of the figure trapped in the temporal distortion, recognises her husband's stance, his posture, the way he holds his arm when reaching for something. She knows that's James, knows he's alive, knows he's been trying to reach her for 12 years, and she finally has an answer to the question that's haunted her all this time. He didn't abandon her, didn't wander off into the desert to die. He was taken, stolen, pulled into a place where she can't follow. 3 months after publication, in February of 2024, something impossible happens. Lena Hartman receives a voicemail on her cell phone. The call comes at 3:14 a.m. She doesn't hear it ring. Her phone is on silent, charging on her nightstand. She just wakes up at dawn to a notification that she has one new message from an unknown number. She plays it, half asleep, expecting spam or a wrong number or maybe a source with new information. Instead, she hears a voice. It's distorted, heavily distorted, interference that sounds like the audio equivalent of the Skull Valley footage, crackling that rises and falls, warping effects that make words stretch and compress, white noise that roars like an ocean, as if the sound itself is being transmitted across some impossible distance, through barriers that were never meant to be crossed from a place where normal physics doesn't apply. But beneath all that distortion, beneath the interference and the noise and the temporal warping, she recognises the voice. She's listened to interviews with James Forsyth's wife, heard Rachel play recordings from his time at Dugway, home videos, voicemails he left when working late, the sound of him laughing at a family barbecue. She knows that voice, and hearing it now coming through her phone at 3 a.m. makes her heart stop. Lena, it's James. I'm not dead. The interference surges, almost drowning out his next words. I know what you published. I know you're trying to understand what happened. I can see your world sometimes. Like looking through water, distorted but visible. I saw the article, saw Rachel reading it, saw her crying, tell her I'm sorry, tell her I tried to come back. Static roars through the recording. When his voice returns, it's quieter, more distant, as if he's moving away from some impossible microphone. They control time in Sector Silver. The object, it's a threshold, a connection point. I slipped outside the timeline when containment broke. I'm trying to get back. I can feel our world. I can sense it, but I can't reach it. The distance isn't spatial, it's temporal. I'm seconds away but years out of phase. Another surge of static. I've been here for I don't know how long. Time doesn't work right. Sometimes it feels like minutes. Sometimes it feels like decades. I can see myself from the outside. See myself in the Skull Valley footage you published. That's me. That's me reaching out, trying to find solid ground in reality. His voice breaks, a sound of pure desperation. Don't trust the Air Force report. Don't believe I'm dead. The object opened again. I felt it. Something's changing in Sector Silver. They're trying to activate it deliberately. They think they can control it now. They can't. Nobody can. It's not a machine. It's not technology. It's something else. Something alive. Something aware. Lena's hands shake so badly she almost drops the phone. Tell my wife I'm still fighting to get home. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to come home that night. Tell her I'm... The message cuts off, not gradually. Just stops mid-sentence as if someone pulled a plug, replaced by a sustained tone that rises in pitch, higher and higher, beyond the range of normal sound, becoming painful to hear, a frequency that seems to vibrate in her skull rather than her ears, then silence. Absolute silence that feels heavier than any sound. Lena sits in her dark bedroom, phone clutched in her hand, listening to the empty air after the message ends. She's shaking, crying, trying to process what she just heard. James Forsyth is alive, not dead, not gone, alive, trapped in some impossible space but conscious and aware and still trying desperately to reach back to the world he was stolen from. The next morning she checks military news feeds out of habit, knowing what she'll find before she even opens her browser. There's a brief statement from Dugway Proving Ground, published at 0600 hours. Records correction. James Forsyth, previously listed as missing, has been reclassified as deceased effective February 14th, 2024. Next of kin have been notified. This administrative update reflects standard procedures for long-term missing person cases and provides official closure to outstanding personnel records. They changed his status 12 years after he vanished. The same day Lena received the voicemail. The same day James Forsyth somehow managed to make contact from whatever temporal prison he occupies. Coincidence? Or did they detect the contact somehow? Did their sensors in Sector Silver pick up the transmission? Did they know he broke through, made contact with the outside world, and immediately moved to discredit it by officially declaring him dead? She examines the voicemail metadata on her phone. Call duration, 2 minutes 14 seconds. Caller ID, unknown. Network carrier, unable to determine. Signal source, no location data available. And then she sees it. The timestamp, the single detail that makes everything else make terrifying sense. The message was received at 3:14 a.m. February 14th, 2024. That's when her phone logged the incoming call. But according to the metadata embedded in the voicemail file itself, the call was placed at 06:18 p.m., March 21, 1993. The same date the Special Access Program was approved. The same date written on the note that started everything. The day Sector Silver opened for the first time. 31 years ago. Somehow, impossibly, James Forsyth called her from 31 years in the past. Or from a place where past and present exist simultaneously, or from somewhere that time doesn't work the way it should, where causality breaks down, where effects can precede causes, where a man displaced in 2011 can make a phone call that originates in 1993 and arrives in 2024. She listens to the message again, and again, and again, focuses on his words, on the warning embedded in his desperate plea. The object opened again. Something's changing. They're trying to activate it deliberately. They think they can control it. Lena pulls up satellite imagery of Dugway Proving Ground, the kind anyone can access through commercial services. She looks at recent photos from the past 6 months, comparing them to older images. There's new construction in the restricted zone, large buildings that weren't there a year ago, power infrastructure being massively expanded, new electrical substations, new power lines, transformers large enough to handle industrial-scale electrical loads, equipment being moved in under heavy security, construction that suggests they're preparing for something that requires enormous amounts of energy. They're not shutting down Sector Silver, they're expanding it, upgrading it, preparing for something. She thinks about James Forsyth, displaced somewhere in the spaces between seconds, trying to reach back to a world that's moved on without him. She thinks about Paul Howard, struck down before he could tell more of what he knew. She thinks about the 500 sheep killed in 1968, about the other people Derek Whiteman saw being taken away after exposure to the object, about all the disappeared personnel whose fates were never recorded, whose families never learned the truth. And she thinks about what happens if the Pentagon succeeds in controlling the object in Sector Silver, if they learn to manipulate time the way it does, if they weaponize it, if they create more temporal distortions, more displacement events, More people trapped in impossible spaces, screaming across years for help that never comes. She makes a decision, starts reaching out to other journalists, scientists who understand temporal physics, congressional oversight committees, international organisations, anyone who will listen, anyone with the authority to stop this. Because James Forsyth's message contained a warning from a man who's seen what the object can do, a man who's experienced firsthand the horror of being displaced from reality, a man who's trying, with his last remaining connection to our world, to save others from his fate. And Lena intends to make sure people hear that warning before Sector Silver activates again, before more containment failures occur, before more people are pulled through into that impossible space where James Forsyth waits. She calls Rachel Forsyth, tells her about the voicemail, plays it for her over the phone. Rachel is silent for a long time after hearing her husband's voice. When she finally speaks, she's crying. He's alive. He's been alive this whole time, and they left him there. They just left him there. Yes, Lena says, but he's still fighting, still trying to get back to you. What can we do? Rachel asks. We make them answer for what they've done. We don't let them bury this. We don't let James become another forgotten victim of a classified program nobody wants to acknowledge. We fight, the same way he's still fighting. The story ends here, but in a facility 840 feet below the Utah desert, in a chamber shielded from the outside world by layers of lead and concrete and electromagnetic barriers, something that shouldn't exist continues to hum at the edge of perception. Its frequency is too low for human ears, 0.18 hertz. The same frequency the Pentagon memo identified as James Forsyth's residual temporal signature. The frequency of a human heartbeat slowed down by a factor of 5, the rhythm of life displaced from its proper time, waiting for the moment when the fields drop again and it can reach out into our reality. And somewhere in the space between seconds, in a place where distance is measured in moments instead of miles, James Forsyth waits too, counting time that doesn't pass the way it should, watching the world he was stolen from through barriers he can't cross, hoping for a chance to slip back through before the gap grows too wide, hoping someone will hear his warning before it's too late. The distance between him and home is measured in moments, but those moments are spread across decades, and with every day that passes in our timeline, the resonance fades a little more, the connection weakens, the probability of spontaneous return drops from 0.001% to something even smaller. But as long as that probability isn't zero, as long as there's any chance at all, James Forsyth keeps reaching, keeps trying, keeps fighting his way back through the impossible spaces because he made a promise to Rachel 12 years ago on a phone call at 6:18 p.m. on September 12, 2011. He promised he'd see her soon, and James Forsyth keeps his promises, even if it takes him 30 years and a journey through broken time to do it.